They said Omegas were born to submit, to serve, to obey, to disappear when Alphas commanded it. They abandoned me alone on a battlefield to die. The Alpha King and his entire army found me still fighting, alone against a dozen rogues. What they saw shocked them all. Chapter 1. The Impossible Stand. The morning had begun with such ordinary promise that Kara almost laughed at the memory. Now, standing as she was in a field painted red with blood that steamed against the autumn earth. Sunlight had gilded the valleys surrounding the Clearwater territory in shades of gold and amber, while cool winds carried the scent of harvest preparations and the comfortable rhythms of pack life that marked the peaceful existence she'd always known. The patrol assignment had seemed routine: inspect the border markers, check for rogue activity, return by sunset for the evening meal where Omega served alphas, and pretended not to exist beyond their usefulness. She remembered the weight of dismissive glances as the patrol formed up. The way Lieutenant Boyd had looked right through her, as if she were merely another piece of equipment to be accounted for and forgotten. Omegas were always included in border patrols. Someone had to carry supplies and tend wounds if fighting occurred, but no one expected them to actually fight. "Stay behind the line, Omega," Boyd had said with the casual indifference of someone addressing a particularly slow child. "If rogues come, you run." "Understood?" "Understood, Lieutenant," she'd replied, keeping her eyes down, as she'd been taught since childhood. "Don't challenge. Don't question. Don't make them remember you exist." But the rogues that had poured across the border an hour later hadn't been the disorganized scavengers everyone expected. They'd moved with coordination that spoke of planning and purpose, their eyes burning with intelligence that made their bestial forms more terrifying rather than less. 20 of them against their patrol of 8 odds that should have been manageable for trained warriors. Should have been. Kara had watched from her position at the rear as the first wave hit Lieutenant Boyd's defensive line like a hammer against glass. She'd seen Brent Hunter, the patrol's strongest fighter, go down in the first 30 seconds, his throat torn out before he could shift fully into his wolf form. She'd heard Roderick's scream cut short as claws like daggers punched through his armor as if it were parchment. The retreat horn had sounded within minutes, a desperate wailing call that meant, abandon the wounded and run for your lives. And they had run. All of them except her, not because she was brave, not because she'd chosen to make some heroic last stand, but because when she tried to follow, her leg had buckled beneath her, caught by a rogue's claws in that first chaotic exchange. And by the time she'd pulled herself upright again, the patrol was gone, and she was alone with enemies that had turned their attention to the easiest prey. That had been 6 hours ago. Kara wiped blood from her eyes, hers own, mixed with the black ichor that passed for blood in rogues, and studied the 3 remaining enemies that circled her position among the fallen stones of what had once been a shepherd's shelter. Her sword, scavenged from Roderick's body, and clutched in hands that should have been too weak to wield it effectively, was nicked and stained, but somehow still held an edge that had proven effective against creatures that should have been far beyond an Omega's capability to harm. More troubling than the sword's impossible durability was the strength that continued to flow through her exhausted frame power that had no source she could identify, that seemed to build rather than diminish with each exchange of combat. Her wounds should have killed her hours ago, but they'd stopped bleeding and started to close with speed that defied everything she understood about Omega healing rates. Something was happening to her. Something that whispered in the back of her consciousness with a voice that sounded like home, despite being utterly foreign. "You are more." The largest of the circling rogues, a massive beast whose form suggested a wolf crossed with something that had never walked under natural moonlight, rose onto its hind legs and released a howl that shook the stones beneath her feet. It was a signal to the others, she realized. The patient's phase of their hunt was ending. "Come on, then," Kara whispered, raising her sword with movements that should have been impossible given the wounds marking her arms and shoulders. "Let's finish this." The first rogue came from her left in a blur of dark fur and snapping jaws. She met it with a technique she'd never been taught, a spinning strike that seemed to flow from instincts buried deeper than conscious memory. Her blade traced an arc through the air that felt right in a way that nothing in her careful, constrained life ever had, and the rogue's head separated from its shoulders cleanly. The second attacked before the first had finished falling, coming from her blind side with claws extended to disembowel. But somehow she knew it was coming, sensed its approach through awareness that extended beyond normal perception. She dropped into a crouch that let the beast pass overhead, her blade opening its belly from chest to pelvis. The third rogue hesitated, intelligence flickering in its burning eyes as it reassessed prey that had just killed 2 packmates in as many seconds. Kara could see its muscles bunching for a retreat, and then new sounds cut through the blood-soaked silence. War horns in the distance, the thunder of hooves moving at supernatural speed, and beneath it all, a presence that seemed to resonate in her bones with recognition she couldn't explain. The rogue heard it, too. Its hesitation shifted to something approaching fear, its ears flattening against its skull as it backed toward bet or cover. Through the smoke came riders whose mounts moved with the fluid grace of predators rather than prey animals. But it was the banner they carried that made Kara's breath catch the silver moon and crossed claws of House Blackmane, the royal house of the Northern Territories, whose alpha king had never lost a battle, and whose wolf was rumored to be more nightmare than natural creature. King Elias Collins rode at the head of his war host, with presence that seemed to bend reality around his passage. Even at this distance, Kara could feel the weight of his attention as his golden eyes swept the battlefield and locked onto her position with intensity that felt almost physical. Behind him came 50 warriors whose reputation preceded them across every territory in the continent. The king's elite guard didn't fight according to normal pack tactics. They moved with coordination that transcended typical pack bonds, operating as extensions of their king's will with precision that made them virtually undefeatable in open combat. The surviving rogue, recognizing that its tactical situation had deteriorated beyond recovery, turned to flee toward the tree. "Stand fast." The command wasn't shouted, yet somehow carried clearly across the distance between the approaching war host and Kara's position. King Elias's voice held layers she couldn't identify, power that bypassed her ears entirely and resonated directly in her chest. The rogue froze mid-step as if struck by lightning, its muscles locked in place by compulsion it couldn't resist. And then the king's attention focused entirely on her. Those golden eyes studying her with concentration that made her want to simultaneously bare her throat in submission and bare her teeth in challenge impulses that contradicted everything she'd been taught about Omega responses to alpha dominance. "Continue," he said, and though his voice remained conversational, the command was unmistakable. He wanted to watch her finish this, wanted to see what she truly was. The weight of supernatural attention pressed against Karara's consciousness like a physical force, as she turned back to the rogue that had been frozen by royal command. Its eyes rolled with panic, foam flecking its muzzle as it struggled against compulsion that held it as effectively as chains. She should have felt pity, should have felt horror at what she was about to do to a helpless enemy. Instead, she felt only the strange power that had been growing within her throughout this impossible battle surge to new heights, responding to the presence of the watching king with intensity that left her gasping. Her sword began to emit a faint silver glow that matched the color of the moon on his banner. Kara moved without conscious thought, her body flowing through forms she'd never learned, but somehow knew. And the rogue died so quickly, it had no time to register the strike that separated its head from its shoulders. Silence fell across the battlefield, broken only by her ragged breathing and the soft clink of armor as 50 elite warriors shifted in their saddles, their attention fixed on the Omega, who should not exist, yet refused to fall. King Elias dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of centuries of practice, his boots making no sound as he approached her position. Behind him, his warriors remained mounted but watchful, hands resting on weapons with the readiness of soldiers who trusted their king, but prepared for all possibilities. "You're injured, Omega," the king said when he reached speaking distance, his tone carrying something that might have been concerned beneath the authority. "Yet you stand. Interesting." Kara straightened despite exhaustion that threatened to drop her where she stood, meeting his golden eyes with defiance she didn't understand but couldn't suppress. "I'm functional, Your Majesty." His lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Functional? Yes. I suppose that's one word for what you are." He gestured to the bodies surrounding her position. 11 rogues, all killed by wounds that spoke of skill far beyond Omega capabilities. "Would you care to explain how a wolf, who should be at the bottom of pack hierarchy, just destroyed enemies that scattered trained warriors?" You don't know, Your Majesty." The admission tasted like failure, but lying to an alpha king seemed inadvisable, even if she'd been capable of crafting convincing deception through her exhaustion. "The power just came when I needed it." "The power just came," he repeated slowly, his attention shifting to her sword. "And that weapon, where did you acquire it?" "From Roderick Boyd. He fell in the first attack." She held the blade up, noting for the first time the way silver light still flickered along its edge. "It shouldn't work for me. Only pack warriors can wield blessed steel effectively." "Indeed." King Elias reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back if she chose, and touched the blade with one finger. The silver glow flared brighter at the contact, and Kara felt something like recognition pass between the weapon and the king. This blade was forged for alpha warriors, keyed to pack hierarchy and bloodline authority. It should be inert in Omega hands. "But it's not," Carol whispered, studying the impossible weapon with new understanding. "Why isn't it?" The king's golden eyes met hers with intensity that made her wolf, normally so quiet and submissive in her consciousness, suddenly press forward with interest she'd never felt before. "That," King Elias said softly, "is precisely what I intend to discover." Chapter 2. The Alpha King's Question. The king's war host established a defensive perimeter around the battlefield with efficiency that spoke of extensive practice in transforming chaos into order. Warriors dismounted and began systematic assessment of the dead, separating rogue bodies from fallen patrol members with respectful efficiency that suggested they understood the weight of lives lost. Kara watched them work while struggling to process the impossibility of her situation. An hour ago, she'd been preparing to die alone on a battlefield where even her own pack had abandoned her. Now she stood in the center of royal attention that should have been focused on matters far more important than a single Omega's inexplicable survival. "Sit before you fall," King Elias said, gesturing to a relatively clean stone near her defensive position. It wasn't quite a command, but the authority in his voice made refusal seem inadvisable. She sat and immediately regretted it, as exhaustion she'd been holding at bay through adrenaline and mysterious reserves crashed over her like a physical wave. Her sword clattered from suddenly nerveless fingers, the silver glow fading as soon as she released it. The king caught the weapon before it could hit the ground, studying it with attention that suggested he was seeing more than just steel and enchantment. "Captain Leonard," he called without taking his eyes from the blade, "your assessment." A scarred warrior with gray threaded through his dark hair approached and examined the sword with professional interest. His eyes, pale amber, that marked him as high-ranking in the pack hierarchy, widened slightly as he studied the weapon, sire. That's clear water-pack steel forged by their weapon master, Gerard Sparks, about 15 years ago. Captain Leonard's rough voice carried undertones of confusion. Standard blessed steel keyed to their pack bonds should be completely inert for anyone outside their hierarchy, lethal only in the hands of their acknowledged warriors. Yet it functioned for an Omega. King Elias observed quietly, "That shouldn't be possible, Your Majesty." The captain's attention shifted to Kara with intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. The enchantments built into blessed steel specifically prevent use by anyone below warrior rank. It's a safety measure to keep weapons out of untrained hands. "I'm not untrained," Kara said before she could stop herself, then immediately wanted to take the words back as both men focused their full attention on her. "I mean, I've observed combat training since I was young. Omegas prepare weapons and armor, tend wounded, were always present during practice sessions. Observation doesn't translate to skill," Captain Leonard said, not unkindly. "The techniques you use to kill those rogues, those aren't learned through watching. They require muscle memory developed through years of dedicated practice." "I've never held a sword before today," Kara admitted, the confession feeling like failure despite being simple truth. "When I picked up Roderick's blade, the movements just came to me like remembering something I'd always known but forgotten." King Elias and his captain exchanged a look, weighted with meaning she couldn't decipher. The king crouched beside her, bringing his face level with hers, and the sheer presence of him this close made her wolf press forward in her consciousness with interest that bordered on eagerness, a response so unlike her normal submissive instincts that it left her reeling. "Look at me," he said softly, and she couldn't have disobeyed if she'd wanted to. His golden eyes seemed to see through her, cataloging details she didn't understand. "Your eyes are blue, standard Omega coloring. But when you were fighting, in those last moments before you killed the final rogue, what color were they?" "I don't know, Your Majesty." "I wasn't exactly looking in a mirror. They were silver," Captain Leonard said flatly. "I watched from distance as you finished that last kill. Your eyes flashed pure silver for approximately 3 seconds, then returned to blue." The revelation sent ice through Kara's exhausted frame. Silver eyes meant alpha bloodline, the mark of wolves born to lead, whose dominance was written into their genetics. Omegas were blue, betas were green or amber. Only alphas bore silver or gold. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I'm Omega. I've always been Omega. My parents were." "Who were your parents? That's—" King Elias interrupted, his tone sharpening with interest that suggested her answer mattered more than casual curiosity would warrant. "Jesse and Tamara Lawrence. They died in a rogue attack when I was 3 years old. I was raised by family friends in the Clearwater Pack." "Family friends," the king repeated slowly. "Not blood relatives?" "No, Your Majesty. Chelsea Vasquez and her mate took me in after my parents died. They provided adequate care. In short, I was educated and trained in Omega duties." She trailed off as she noticed the king's expression shift to something approaching satisfaction, as if she'd just confirmed a theory he'd been developing. "And these adoptive parents, did they ever discuss your birth family's background? Your bloodline heritage?" "No, Your Majesty. Chelsea said it would be too painful that I should focus on building a future rather than dwelling on a past I couldn't remember clearly." "How convenient," Captain Leonard muttered, earning a sharp glance from his king that suggested the comment had been inappropriate, despite apparently being exactly what King Elias was thinking. "Your Majesty," Kara said carefully, trying to understand the undercurrents flowing through this conversation. "Why does my family background matter? I'm just an Omega who got lucky in combat." "Surely, There are more important matters requiring your attention than investigating how one low-ranking wolf survived when she shouldn't have. King Elias stood, his height suddenly emphasizing the difference in their ranks, as he looked down at her with expression that mingled assessment with something that might have been protective instinct. Kara Lawrence, you are either the most dangerous Omega alive or you're not an Omega at all. Either possibility makes you extremely valuable to some parties and extremely dangerous to others. The blunt statement made her stomach drop as implications began filtering through her exhaustion. I don't understand your fighting techniques, the king said, beginning to pace around her position while Captain Leonard watched with the alertness of a wolf guarding something precious. They weren't random movements that happened to prove effective. They were Moonshadow Form's combat techniques developed 200 years ago by House Silverrest for use against enemies immune to conventional attacks. I've never heard of House Silvercrest, Kara admitted. No, you wouldn't have. They were wiped out 23 years ago during the War of Broken Crowns, when several alpha families united to eliminate a bloodline they considered too powerful to be allowed to continue. King Elias stopped his pacing directly in front of her, his golden eyes boring into hers with intensity that stole her breath. The Silver Crest line was declared extinct with full honors after the last known member died defending civilians against a shadow spawn incursion. I don't see what that has to do with me, Kara said, even as a cold certainty began building in her chest, that she was about to hear something that would shatter her entire understanding of her own identity. The Silvercrest wolves were unique, Captain Leonard said, his rough voice carrying weight of someone reciting historical fact. They possessed abilities that transcended normal pack hierarchy. Their bloodline produced wolves who could manifest alpha traits regardless of their designated rank, whose power responded to necessity rather than genetics. Most notably, their eyes would flash silver when they accessed their full capabilities, then return to their normal color once the crisis passed. The world seemed to tilt sideways as connections formed in Carrara's exhausted mind. You think I'm what, some lost Silver Crest heir? That's impossible. They died out before I was even born. 23 years ago, King Elias corrected softly. Which would make you what? 22 years old. 21? Kara whispered, doing math that suddenly felt far more significant than simple arithmetic. My birthday was last month. So you were born approximately 2 years after the Silver Crest extinction was officially declared. The king crouched beside her again, his proximity making her wolf practically vibrate with awareness she'd never experienced toward any alpha. Tell me, Kara, do you remember anything about your parents? Any detail? No matter how small. She closed her eyes, reaching for memories that had faded to nearly nothing over 18 years of being discouraged from asking questions about her past. My mother... I remember her singing and her hands were scarred like she'd trained with weapons extensively. My father was always watchful. Even when we were safe inside packed territory, like he expected attack at any moment. A warrior and his mate living in hiding, Captain Leonard observed, raising their daughter in obscurity while teaching her nothing about her heritage. But why? Kara opened her eyes to find King Elias watching her with expression that suggested he already knew the answer, but wanted her to reach the conclusion herself. If they were Silverrest survivors, why hide? Why raise me as Omega when I could have been? Could have been what? The king prompted gently. An alpha, a potential threat to the families who had worked to eliminate your bloodline, a political complication that could reignite conflicts that had finally been settled through your family's extinction. The implications were staggering. If what they were suggesting was true, her entire life had been built on deception, designed not to protect her happiness, but to protect the political convenience of wolves whose names she didn't even know. Your Majesty, she said slowly, struggling to keep her voice steady despite emotional chaos threatening to overwhelm rational thought. If what you're suggesting is accurate, then I've been living a lie designed to benefit people who murdered my family, the people who raised me. Were they part of the conspiracy? Unknown, King Elias admitted. They may have been willing participants in concealing your heritage, or they may have been honest friends of your parents who honored a dying request to keep you safe by ensuring no one discovered what you were. His expression softened slightly. Either way, they're beyond questioning now. Chelsea Vasquez died 3 months ago in a hunting accident. Her mate followed 2 weeks later from grief-related complications. The timing made Kara's blood run cold. How convenient. She echoed Captain Leonard's earlier observation. They die just before I start manifesting abilities that would have required explanation. Indeed, the king stood again, offering her his hand. Which brings us to your current situation. You cannot return to Clearwater Pack as if nothing has changed. Your abilities will be noted and reported. Word will spread. And if powerful families discover that the Silver Crest line survived, your life expectancy will be measured in days rather than years. Kara stared at his outstretched hand, understanding that accepting it meant accepting that her old life was over, regardless of what investigation might reveal about her true heritage. And your alternative, Your Majesty. You accept my protection while we investigate the truth about your bloodline. I can offer you safety, resources to uncover what was hidden, and time to develop abilities you've only begun to access. His golden eyes held hers with intensity that made her wolf whimper with longing she didn't understand. In exchange, you provide intelligence about shadow spawn tactics and any knowledge that surfaces as your memories return. You're offering to protect me from people who apparently killed my entire family to eliminate a political threat. Kara studied his face, searching for deception and finding only certainty that somehow made the impossible offer feel genuine. Why? What do you gain from sheltering someone who could potentially challenge your own authority if the Silver Crest were really as powerful as you claim? A slow smile crossed King Elias's face, the first real expression of emotion she'd seen from him beyond professional assessment. An excellent question. One that suggests you have more political instinct than most wolves raised in power. He crouched beside her again, bringing them eye to eye. The truth, my wolf recognized something in you the moment I saw you standing alone on this battlefield. Something that transcends pack politics and territorial disputes. What? Kara whispered, though her wolf was already pressing forward with certainty that made her want to simultaneously laugh and cry. Well, discuss that once you're recovered enough to properly process what it means. King Elias stood, his hand still extended. For now, do you accept my protection, Kara Lawrence? Or do you wish to take your chances with whatever political forces might mobilize against you, once word spreads of an Omega who fights like an Alpha? She looked at his hand, then past him to where his warriors waited with patience that spoke of absolute loyalty to their king. She thought about returning to Clearwater Pack, where Lieutenant Boyd would demand explanation for how she'd survived when trained warriors had fallen, where questions would be asked that she had no safe answers for. And she thought about the power that had flowed through her during combat, the certainty that had felt more real than anything in her carefully constrained life, the sense that she was finally becoming what she'd always been meant to be. Kara took the Alpha King's hand and felt power resonate between them like recognition of something that had been waiting to manifest since the moment their eyes first met across a blood-soaked battlefield. I accept your protection, Your Majesty, she said clearly, and whatever truth we discover about who I really am. King Elias pulled her to her feet with gentle strength that belied the power she could sense coiled beneath his controlled exterior. Welcome to my pack, Kara, at least temporarily. His smile turned slightly wicked, though something tells me temporary won't accurately describe what's beginning here. Before she could ask what he meant, horn calls echoed across the battlefield. Urgent signals that meant new developments requiring immediate attention. Captain Leonard appeared at the king's side, his expression grim. "Sire, scouts report. Clearwater Pack leadership approaching with approximately 30 warriors. They're demanding return of their Omega and answers regarding royal interference in their internal pack matters." King Elias's hand tightened briefly on Car's before releasing. How interesting. They abandoned her to die, but now that she's survived and gained royal attention, suddenly she's valuable enough to demand back. He turned to face the approaching Clearwater contingent with expression that had gone from protective to dangerous. This should be illuminating. Carrara's stomach dropped as she recognized the lead rider, Lieutenant Boyd, whose orders to run had left her alone on a battlefield. Behind him rode wolves she'd known her entire life, whose indifference had marked every day of her existence as invisible servant, whose presence barely registered beyond her usefulness. Now they were coming to reclaim her, and she had no idea whether King Elias's protection would prove sufficient against pack bonds and territorial authority that had shaped her entire world. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "what happens if they demand I return? Pack law gives them authority over their own members." King Elias's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Pack law is about to discover it has limitations when royal authority decides to take interest in how packs treat their most vulnerable members. He raised his voice to carry across the battlefield. "Captain Leonard, defensive formation. No one approaches the Omega without my explicit permission." As 50 elite warriors moved to positions that transformed casual gathering into military formation, Kara realized that her survival had just triggered a confrontation between royal authority and pack sovereignty. And she was standing at the exact center of a conflict that could reshape territory politics. The real battle, she understood with sudden clarity, was just beginning. Chapter 3. Pack Law and Royal Command. The Clearwater contingent pulled their mounts to a halt at the edge of King Elias's defensive perimeter. Their formation designed to project authority rather than aggression. Lieutenant Boyd dismounted with practiced ease, his expression carefully neutral, despite the tension radiating from every line of his body. "Your Majesty," he said, executing a bow that managed to convey respect while simultaneously suggesting he was honoring formality rather than acknowledging superior authority. "We've come to retrieve our pack member and offer our gratitude for your intervention against the rogue threat." "Your pack member," King Elias repeated slowly, his tone conversational despite the steel underlying every word. "Would that be the same pack member you abandoned on a battlefield to die alone, while your patrol fled to safety?" Boyd's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "A tactical retreat was necessary to preserve the majority of our force, Your Majesty. The loss of one Omega, while regrettable, was preferable to losing our entire patrol to enemies that had already killed 3 trained warriors." "The loss of one Omega," the king said, taking a single step forward that somehow transformed the space between them into a challenge despite the dozen feet that still separated them. "Tell me, Lieutenant, is that how Clearwater Pack values all its members based on their rank, their usefulness, Your Majesty? I mean, no disrespect, but internal pack hierarchy is the sovereign right of each Terato's leadership." A new voice joined the conversation as another rider dismounted, an older wolf, with silver threading his dark hair and authority that marked him as someone accustomed to command. "I am Aaron Darling Alpha of Clearwater Pack. While we appreciate your concern for our members' welfare, pack law is clear regarding territorial sovereignty over our own wolves." King Elias's expression didn't change, but Kara felt the temperature drop as his power pressed outward in a wave that made every Clearwater wolf except their alpha take an involuntary step backward. Alpha darling, how convenient that you've arrived to reclaim a pack member you left to die. Tell me, would you have made this journey if she'd simply perished as you expected? Or is it perhaps her unexpected survival that makes her suddenly valuable enough to warrant your personal attention? Kara watched Alpha Darling's face carefully. Seeing micro-expressions that suggested the king's assessment had struck uncomfortably close to truth. The Alpha's eyes flickered to her briefly, and she saw calculation there rather than concern. Assessment of an asset rather than relief at a pack member's survival. Your Majesty, Darling said carefully. What happened to Kara was tragic but necessary given the tactical situation. However, she remains a member of Clearwater Pack under my authority. Pack law gives me the right to demand her return regardless of where she might currently stand. Pack law? King Elias mused, his golden eyes never leaving the Clearwater Alpha's face. Yes. Let's discuss pack law, specifically the portions that address Alpha responsibility for pack member welfare, and the circumstances under which territorial sovereignty can be superseded by royal intervention. Captain Leonard moved to stand beside his king, producing a scroll from his saddlebag with practiced efficiency. Article 7 of the Continental Pack Accords, he read in his rough voice. Territorial alphas maintain sovereign authority over pack members within their borders, provided said authority is exercised in accordance with fundamental welfare standards established by royal decree. Article 12, subsection 3. Royal authority may intervene in pack governance when evidence suggests systematic abuse, abandonment, or deliberate endangerment of pack members unable to defend their own interests. Alpha Darling's expression darkened. You're suggesting Clearwater Pack systematically abuses its omegas? That's a serious accusation, Your Majesty. Is it an accusation? King Elias asked quietly. Or merely an observation based on your own admission that sacrificing an omega to preserve higher-ranking wolves was necessary tactical thinking? He gestured to Kara without taking his attention from Darling. This wolf survived impossible odds using combat techniques she claims to have never been taught, wielding blessed steel that should have been inert in her hands. Either she's an omega with unprecedented abilities that you've been systematically suppressing, or she's not an omega at all, and you've been deliberately misclassifying her rank for reasons I'm very interested in understanding. The implications hung in the air like thunder before lightning. Kara saw Lieutenant Boyd's expression shift from defensive to shocked as connections formed in his mind. Several of the Clearwater warriors exchanged glances that suggested they were reconsidering what they thought they knew about the quiet Omega who'd served them without complaint for years. Your Majesty, Alpha Darling said with careful control, Carrara has been properly ranked according to standard assessment protocols. If she demonstrated unusual abilities under combat stress, that's certainly interesting, but doesn't change her fundamental classification. Omegas can occasionally access enhanced capabilities during crisis situations. Not like this, Captain Leonard interrupted, his tone carrying absolute certainty. Sire, permission to share tactical assessment? King Elias nodded once, his attention still locked on Alpha Darling like a predator, watching prey decide whether to run or fight. The combat techniques displayed were moonshadow forms, Leonard said, addressing the Clearwater contingent directly, specifically advanced sequences developed by House Silverest for integration with mixed-rank units. These aren't stress response enhancements or lucky instinct. They're trained methodology that requires both genetic capability and extensive practice to execute effectively. The name Silver Crest rippled through the clear water wolves like a stone thrown into still water. Kara saw recognition flashed across several faces, followed by expressions ranging from disbelief to what might have been fear. Silver Crest died out, Lieutenant Boyd said flatly. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows what they were told. King Elias corrected. Which makes the question of how an Omega in your pack happens to possess their signature combat techniques rather pressing. Wouldn't you agree? Alpha Darling? Darling's expression had shifted from defensive authority to something approaching concern. Your Majesty, if you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts and asking questions. King Elias finally broke eye contact with the Clearwater Alpha to glance at Carrara, and the brief warmth in his gaze made her wolf practically purr despite the tension crackling through the air. Fact. Cara Lawrence survived combat that killed trained warriors. Fact. She used techniques belonging to a supposedly extinct bloodline. Fact. Her eyes flashed silver during combat alpha coloring that should be impossible for an Omega. Question. How did an Omega in your pack develop these capabilities without you noticing? Unless, Captain Leonard added with tone that suggested he was voicing thoughts his king preferred to leave unspoken. The capabilities were noticed and deliberately suppressed through classification as Omega, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Alpha Darling's face flushed with anger. That's a serious accusation, Captain. You're suggesting I deliberately misranked a pack member to suppress bloodline abilities. For what possible purpose? For the same purpose several Alpha families had when they united to eliminate House Silver, King Elias said softly, his words carrying more weight than any shout. Political convenience, territorial security, the comfort of knowing that a bloodline, powerful enough to challenge established authority, had been permanently removed from consideration. The accusation was devastating in its implications. Cara felt her understanding of her entire life shifting beneath her feet like sand in a tide. If what King Elias was suggesting was true, if Alpha Darling had known what she was and deliberately suppressed it, then every moment of her carefully constrained existence had been a lie designed to prevent her from becoming a threat to his authority. Your Majesty, Darling said with dangerous calm, you're basing serious accusations on speculation and circumstantial evidence. Even if Cara does possess unusual abilities, that doesn't prove Silvercrest heritage. It certainly doesn't justify royal intervention in Pak sovereignty, doesn't it? King Elias took another step forward, and this time his power manifested visibly golden light, flickering along his skin like contained lightning. Let me be absolutely clear about something, Alpha Darling. I don't need to prove anything to intervene when I suspect a pack is systematically abusing vulnerable members. Article 12 gives me broad authority to investigate and act on suspicions of mistreatment. Your only options are to cooperate with my investigation or to formally challenge royal authority and face the consequences of that choice. The threat was unmistakable. Challenging royal authority meant potential military action, territorial sanctions, and political isolation that could Clearwater Pak's position in the territorial hierarchy. Darling might hold authority within his borders, but King Elias commanded resources that could make those borders meaningless if he chose to exercise his full power. What are you proposing, Your Majesty? Darling asked, his tone suggesting he knew he'd already lost this confrontation, but was trying to salvage what advantage he could. Cara remains under my protection while we investigate her heritage and capabilities. If investigation reveals she was properly classified and simply developed stress responsibilities, she'll be returned to your authority with royal apologies for the inconvenience. King Elias's smile held no warmth. However, if we discover evidence of deliberate suppression or misclassification, Clearwater Pak will face formal inquiry regarding how many other wolves might have been similarly abused. It was a masterful political maneuver. Cara realized King Elias had transformed her individual situation into a question about systemic pack governance, making her case a test of whether his royal authority would tolerate abuses hidden behind territorial sovereignty. Darling couldn't refuse without appearing to have something to hide. but accepting meant allowing royal investigation into pack internal matters. How long would this investigation require? Darling asked, stiffly. As long as necessary to determine truth. King Elias glanced at Kara again, and she saw something in his expression that made her wolf practically vibrate with awareness. Though, I suspect we'll have preliminary answers within days rather than weeks. Bloodline heritage has ways of manifesting when wolves are placed in environments where their full capabilities are encouraged rather than suppressed. Lieutenant Boyd stepped forward suddenly, his expression troubled. Your Majesty, permission to speak? King Elias nodded, curiosity flickering across his face. If Kara truly possesses alpha bloodline capabilities, why didn't she manifest them before today? I've known her since she was brought to our pack as a child. She's always been quiet, submissive, typical Omega behavior in every respect. An excellent question, King Elias said, his attention shifting to Boyd with interest that suggested he was reassessing his initial dismissal of the lieutenant as simply another wolf who'd abandoned a pack member. Captain Leonard, your expertise on bloodline suppression. Sire, there are several methods for suppressing inherited capabilities. Leonard replied, his rough voice carrying the weight of someone reciting from extensive knowledge. Physical trauma during development can damage access to genetic traits. Certain herbs and compounds can block supernatural abilities if administered consistently over years. And perhaps most effectively, psychological conditioning that convinces the wolf their capabilities don't exist can prevent manifestation even when genetic potential is present. Kara's stomach dropped as implications crashed over her. Chelsea Vasquez had prepared all her meals as a child, had insisted she take daily vitamin supplements that tasted bitter, despite honey added to mask the flavor. She'd been taught from earliest memory that Omegas, who tried to rise above their station, brought disaster on themselves and their packs. That accepting her place was the only path to safety and belonging. Your Majesty, she said quietly, drawing attention from everyone present. My adoptive mother, she gave me supplements every day from the time I was old enough to remember. She said they were necessary, because I was weak as a child, that without them, I would never be healthy enough to fulfill even basic Omega duties. King Elias's expression darkened dangerously. And when did you stop taking these supplements? 3 months ago, when Chelsea died. Carrara's voice sounded distant to her own ears as pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. There was no one to continue preparing them, and I assumed they weren't truly necessary since I felt fine without them. 3 months, Captain Leonard said thoughtfully. Depending on the specific compounds used, that would be approximately the right timeline for suppression effects to fully wear off. The abilities manifesting under extreme stress today would represent capabilities that had been building toward expression. As the suppression faded, Alpha Darling's face had gone carefully blank. But Kara could see tension in his shoulders that suggested he was processing information that complicated whatever calculations he'd been making. Your Majesty, if Chelsea Vasquez was administering suppression compounds, that was done without pack authority or knowledge. We don't condone, don't you? King Elias interrupted coldly. You're telling me that one of your pack members was systematically drugging a child for nearly 2 decades, and no one in your pack hierarchy noticed. Your healers never questioned why a supposedly weak Omega required daily supplements. Your warriors never wondered why Blessed Steel went inert in her hands, despite her being present during combat training for years. The questions hung in the air like accusations, each one highlighting failures of oversight that suggested either incompetence or complicity. Darling's silence spoke volumes about which explanation was more likely. I think King Elias said with dangerous calm that formal investigation of Clearwater Pack governance is absolutely necessary. Captain Leonard, You'll remain here with 20 warriors to begin preliminary assessment. I want records of every Omega classification decision made in the past 25 years, interviews with pack healers regarding supplement protocols and documentation of any wolves who died or disappeared under circumstances that might warrant closer examination. Sire, Leonard said with satisfaction that suggested he'd been hoping for exactly this order. It will be my pleasure. Alpha Darling looked like he wanted to argue, but the political reality was inescapable. Refusing royal investigation at this point would be tantamount to admitting guilt. His only option was cooperation and hope that investigation didn't uncover evidence of active conspiracy beyond what Chelsea Vasquez had done independently. Your Majesty is of course welcome to investigate, Darling said with stiff formality. Clearwater Pack has nothing to hide. Excellent, King Elias replied, his tone making clear he believed exactly the opposite. Then you won't object to Kara remaining under my protection during investigation rather than returning to Pack territory where evidence might be compromised. It wasn't a question. Darling's expression made clear he understood he was being outmaneuvered at every turn, but he nodded with as much dignity as he could muster. As your Majesty wishes, King Elias turned to Carrara, his expression softening as he took in her exhausted state, and the way she was struggling to process revelations that had shattered her understanding of her entire life. Can you ride? We have several hours' travel to reach my territory, and I'd prefer to have you under proper security before word spreads about today's events. I can ride, Your Majesty, Kara said. Though truthfully, she wasn't certain her legs would support her weight once she stood. The adrenaline that had carried her through combat and political confrontation was fading rapidly. Leaving behind exhaustion so complete, it felt like physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. King Elias must have seen something in her expression, because he moved to her side and offered his arm with gesture that was support rather than dominance. Lean on me. You've earned the right to admit weakness after the day you've had. The casual kindness in his voice nearly undid her composure entirely. Kara accepted his support, feeling power and warmth radiating from him as he guided her toward a horse that one of his warriors had prepared. But as they walked, she caught Alpha Darling watching her with expression that sent chills down her spine. Assessment mixed with something that might have been calculation, or might have been concern about problems she represented that he'd thought permanently solved. Your Majesty, she murmured quietly, enough that only he could hear. He's afraid of me. Why is he afraid? Kingus helped her mount with gentle efficiency before responding in equally quiet tones. Because if you truly are Silverrest, your very existence invalidates territorial settlements that have been considered stable for 20 years. Noble families who divided Silvercrest lands among themselves would face legitimate challenges to their authority. And more than that, he paused, his golden eyes meeting hers with intensity that stole her breath. Silvercrest wolves weren't just powerful. They were prophesied to produce a wolf who could unite all territories under single authority and high alpha who would transcend pack politics entirely. You think I might be this prophesied wolf? Kara asked the idea so absurd she would have laughed if not for the complete seriousness in his expression. I think King Elias said carefully that we're going to discover exactly what you are, and I suspect the answer will change everything. He mounted his own horse with fluid grace, and the war host formed up around them with Kara, positioned at the center of royal protection that should have felt smothering, but instead felt like safety she'd never known existed. As they began the journey toward King Elias's territory, Kara looked back once to see Alpha Darling still watching her departure, and she understood with sudden clarity that whatever investigation uncovered about her past, her old life in Clearwater Pack was over forever. The question was, what would replace it, and whether she would survive long enough to discover the answer. Chapter 4. The royal territory. The journey to King Elias's territory revealed capabilities Kara hadn't known she possessed. The horse provided for her was clearly bred for royal service, its supernatural endurance and intelligence requiring communication methods that transcended normal horsemanship. Yet somehow she found herself coordinating with the creature, as if they'd trained together for years, understanding its responses through awareness that bypassed conscious thought. More unsettling was her ability to match the pace maintained by riders whose supernatural nature allowed them to cover distances that would have killed normal mounts. The war host moved with coordination that spoke of pack mentality extending beyond individual wolves to encompass their entire formation. Each rider positioned to support collective movement that prioritized speed over comfort. Kara found herself naturally integrating into their formation. Despite lacking any formal training in military tactics, her position shifted automatically to maintain optimal spacing with surrounding riders, while her awareness extended to encompass the unit's movement patterns with clarity that felt simultaneously foreign and utterly natural. "You're adapting remarkably well," King Elias observed during a brief pause to water the horses at a stream that marked the halfway point of their journey. His golden eyes studied her with interest that made her wolf press forward eagerly despite exhaustion that should have left her barely conscious. Most wolves require weeks of training to coordinate effectively with Royal Guard formations. "It feels familiar," Carrara admitted, uncertain whether such confession represented weakness or simply honesty he deserved after offering protection. "Like remembering something I learned long ago but forgot." "Genetic memory," said a new voice. A female warrior with amber eyes and scars marking her face as someone who'd survived serious combat approached with water skin that she offered to Kara. "I'm Bridget Russo, one of His Majesty's personal guard. What you're experiencing suggests bloodline heritage that includes instinctive knowledge passed through generations." Kara accepted the water gratefully, studying the warrior who'd introduced herself with courtesy unusual between ranks as desperate as Royal Guard and Omega. "Is that common? Genetic memory in wolves with strong bloodlines?" "Yes." Bridget settled beside her with easy camaraderie that suggested she didn't care about rank distinctions, particularly in families that developed specialized combat techniques over multiple generations. The body remembers what the mind has forgotten. How Silverist was particularly known for strong genetic memory. King Elias added, moving to sit on Kara's other side with casual proximity that his warriors noted but didn't comment on. Their training methodology specifically incorporated techniques designed to activate inherited knowledge during combat stress. "Like what happened to me on the battlefield," Kara said slowly, understanding clicking into place. "The movements that came without thinking were your ancestors teaching you how to survive." Bridget finished with satisfaction. "Your body recognized the crisis and accessed capabilities that had been suppressed but never truly eliminated. The explanation made sense of impossibilities that had defied rational analysis, but it also reinforced uncomfortable truths about how thoroughly her development had been manipulated by people she'd trusted to have her best interests in mind." "Your Majesty," Kara said carefully. If Chelsea really was suppressing inherited capabilities, why would she do that? What did she gain from keeping me weak? King Elias's expression darkened. "That's one of several questions we'll be investigating, but I suspect the answer someone paying her to ensure you never realized what you were." "Who would benefit from that?" "Anyone who profited from your family's extinction," Bridget said bluntly, earning a sharp look from her king that she met with expression suggesting she was simply stating obvious truth. Silverist territories were divided among 5 noble families after the bloodline was declared ended. If a legitimate heir surfaced, those families would face legal challenges to their authority. So, I'm not just a political inconvenience, Carrara said, cold certainty settling in her stomach. I'm an existential threat to people with resources to eliminate problems. Which is why you're under royal protection, King Elias said firmly, his hand settling on her shoulder with warmth that sent tingles through her exhausted frame. No one touches you without going through me first, and I promise you, Kara, they won't. The conviction in his voice made her wolf practically purr with satisfaction she didn't understand. There was something about this alpha king that called to her on levels beyond rational thought, made her trust him despite having known him for mere hours. We should continue, Captain Leonard called from his position near the horses. We're still in disputed territory. Better to reach the border before nightfall. The war host remounted with efficiency that spoke of extensive practice, and Kara found herself once again positioned at the center of protective formation that made her simultaneously grateful and uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being valued enough to warrant protection, wasn't sure how to process the reality that an alpha king considered her safety important enough to mobilize his elite warriors. As they rode, the landscape gradually shifted from the rolling hills and scattered forests of neutral territory to more dramatic terrain that spoke of supernatural influence on natural development. Trees grew larger and more ancient. Their branches twisted into patterns that suggested they'd witnessed centuries of pack politics and territorial conflicts. The very air felt charged with power that made her skin prickle with awareness. We're crossing into my territory now, King Elias said, guiding his mount closer to hers as they passed beneath a natural arch formed by two massive trees whose branches had grown together overhead. You'll feel the pack bombs strengthen as we go deeper. Try not to be alarmed. Pack bonds? Kara asked, confused about what she was supposed to feel. But I'm not part of your pack. The words died as sensation crashed over her like a wave. Awareness of every wolf in the formation suddenly crystallized in her consciousness with clarity that went beyond normal packs. She could feel their emotional states, their tactical assessments, their absolute loyalty to their king. More unsettling still, she could feel King Elias himself as a blazing presence that seemed to anchor everything else power and control, wrapped around protective instinct that focused entirely on her. What? She gasped, struggling to process input that threatened to overwhelm her already exhausted mind. How is this possible? I shouldn't be able to feel your pack bonds this clearly. You shouldn't, King Elias agreed, his tone carrying mix of concern and satisfaction, unless your bloodline heritage includes capabilities that transcend normal pack hierarchy. He guided his horse even closer until they were riding almost stirrup to stirrup. Focus on my presence. Use it as anchor against the overflow. Kara did as instructed, directing her attention toward the blazing awareness of him in her consciousness. Immediately, the chaotic input from 50 warriors organized itself into comprehensible patterns, arranging around his presence like satellites around a sun. The relief was instantaneous and profound. Better? He asked, golden eyes searching her face with intensity that made her heart race. Yes, she managed. But Your Majesty, this isn't normal, is it? Even for wolves with strong bloodlines. No, Bridget answered from her position slightly behind them, her tone carrying awe that suggested even she found this development remarkable. What you're experiencing is high alpha sense, the ability to perceive and integrate pack bonds across multiple territories. It's the capability that would allow a single wolf to unite all packs under cohesive leadership. The prophesied ability, Kara whispered, remembering King Elias's earlier comment about silver crest wolves being destined to produce a high alpha. One of several indicators we'll be watching for, King Elias confirmed, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we get you to safety, proper rest, and competent healing for injuries you've been ignoring. Then, we start formal investigation of your heritage, as if his words had reminded her body of its depleted state. Exhaustion crashed over Kara with renewed force. She swayed in the saddle, vision blurring as adrenaline finally gave out entirely. Strong arms caught her before she could fall, and she found herself pulled across to King Elias's mount, held securely against his chest as he took control of both horses with casual skill. "Sleep," he murmured, his voice resonating through her awareness like command and comfort combined. "You're safe now." Kara wanted to protest that Omegas didn't sleep in Alpha arms. That propriety demanded she maintain proper distance, that people would talk and assume things that complicated already complex political situations. Instead, surrounded by his warmth and the steady beat of his heart against her cheek, she surrendered to exhaustion and let darkness claim her consciousness. She woke to softness and warmth, utterly unlike anything she'd experienced in her carefully constrained life. The bed beneath her felt like sleeping on clouds, and blankets covered her that must have cost more than everything she'd ever owned combined. Sunlight filtered through windows hung with curtains in deep blue that matched the sky beyond. For a moment, Kara simply lay still, processing the reality that she was alive, safe, and apparently being housed in accommodations far beyond anything appropriate for an Omega of questionable heritage. "You're awake," said a gentle voice. A woman with kind eyes and healer marks on her sleeves approached the bed carrying a tray that smelled of food and herbs. "I'm Angelita Campos, royal healer. How are you feeling?" "Like I fought an army and lost," Kara admitted, trying to sit up and discovering that her body had opinions about movement that involved sharp protest from approximately every muscle group. "You fought an army and won," Angelita corrected with slight smile. "Though you certainly paid the price for it. I've treated your injuries as best I could, but you'll need several more days of rest and healing before you're fully recovered." Kara accepted the tray, discovering she was ravenous despite exhaustion. "Where am I? The royal residence, North Wing guest quarters." Angelita settled into a chair beside the bed, studying Kara with professional interests that suggested she was cataloging more than just physical injuries. "His Majesty insisted you be housed in rooms appropriate for a visiting dignitary, rather than assigned to standard guest quarters. That seems excessive for an Omega of uncertain heritage," Kara observed, though warmth spread through her chest at evidence that King Elias considered her worthy of such consideration. "His Majesty doesn't consider you an Omega," Angelita said bluntly, "and neither do I. Based on the injuries you sustained and survived, normal Omega physiology wouldn't have withstood the blood loss and tissue damage you experienced. The fact that you were conscious and functional when you arrived here suggests healing capabilities consistent with Alpha bloodlines." Kara set down the cup she'd been raising to her lips, appetite suddenly forgotten. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without formal bloodline testing." Angelita's expression softened. "I understand this is overwhelming. Discovering that everything you believed about yourself may have been deliberately constructed deception. But I want you to know that whatever we discover about your heritage, Ural has made your protection his personal priority." "Why?" Kara asked, voicing the question that had been circling her mind since the moment King Elias had first offered his hand on that blood-soaked battlefield. "Why does he care what happens to me? I'm nobody. Or at least I was nobody until yesterday." Angelita smiled with expression that suggested she knew more than she was willing to share. "Perhaps you should ask His Majesty that question directly. He's been waiting for you to wake. Shall I tell him you're ready to receive visitors?" Kara looked down at herself, discovering she'd been changed into a sleeping gown of soft fabric that probably cost more than she'd earned in a year of garrison duty. Her hair was clean and braided, her wounds bandaged with competence that spoke of extensive healing expertise. I'm hardly dressed to receive the king, she protested. His Majesty has seen you covered in blood and barely conscious. I don't think a nightgown will scandalize him. Angelita stood heading toward the door. I'll give you a few minutes to finish eating, then send him in. Try not to be too nervous. He's far less terrifying when he's not commanding armies. The healer left before Kara could formulate response to that statement, leaving her alone with her thoughts and growing anxiety about confronting an alpha king. While dressed inappropriately and uncertain about proper protocol, she forced herself to eat mechanically, knowing her body needed fuel, even if her stomach was twisted with nerves. By the time she'd finished, enough time had passed that the knock on her door didn't startle her quite as much as it might have otherwise. "Come in," she called, setting the tray aside and trying to arrange herself into something approaching dignified posture. Despite being in bed and dressed for sleep, King Elias entered alone. Without the warriors who'd surrounded him during their journey, he changed from travel clothes into more casual attire that somehow made him seem more rather than less imposing power that didn't need formal trappings to be obvious in every line of his body. "Kara," he said, his voice warm with relief as he approached the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been thoroughly lectured by competent healers about ignoring serious injuries," she replied, aiming for lightness and mostly succeeding. Angelita seems quite firm in her opinions about proper recovery protocols. His smile transformed his face from imposing authority to someone approachable and genuine. "She's the best healer in the Northern Territories. If she says you need rest, I trust her judgment completely." He settled into the chair Angelita had vacated, his attention focused entirely on her in a way that made her wolf practically vibrate with pleasure. "I wanted to check on you personally and discuss what happens next." "What does happen next?" Kara asked, grateful for direct approach that bypassed awkward small talk. "Your healer says I'm not actually Omega. You believe I might be Silver Crest heir. And apparently my continued existence threatens political stability. That's a significant amount of upheaval from yesterday morning when my biggest concern was carrying supplies for a border patrol." "An accurate summary," King Elias agreed, leaning forward with elbows on his knees in posture that suggested he was settling in for serious conversation. "Here's what I propose. First, we conduct formal bloodline testing to determine your actual heritage. That will take approximately 3 days and requires cooperation from specialized healers who can assess genetic markers with precision. And if testing confirms I'm Silver Crest, then we face complicated political situation that will require careful navigation. But you won't face it alone." His golden eyes held hers with intensity that made her breath catch. "Regardless of what testing reveals, you remain under my protection. That's not negotiable." "Your Majesty, Elias," he interrupted gently. "When we're private, you can call me Elias. The formality is unnecessary between us." The casual permission to use his given name felt more intimate than it probably should. "Elias," Kara said carefully, testing how it felt on her tongue. "Why are you doing this?" "Protecting me comes with significant political complications. You said yourself that powerful families benefited from my bloodline's extinction. Making yourself my shield means making yourself their target." "Yes," he agreed simply with a smile that suggested the danger didn't concern him remotely. "It does. That doesn't answer my question, doesn't it?" Elias stood moving to sit on the edge of her bed with proximity that should have been inappropriate, but instead felt natural. "Kara, from the moment I saw you standing alone on that battlefield, my wolf recognized something in you. Something that goes beyond political calculations or territorial concerns." Her heart was racing now, pulse pounding, as implications of his words crashed over her awareness. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Elias replied softly, reaching out to take her hand in his with gentle strength that made her wolf practically sing with joy. "That politics aside, Heritage investigation aside, everything else aside, you're mine to protect. And I'm not going to apologize for that, or try to make it more complicated than it needs to be. Kara stared at their joined hands, processing revelation that changed everything. You're talking about mate bonds. I'm talking about what my wolf has been screaming at me since the moment we met. His thumb traced patterns on her palm that sent tingles up her arm, whether you feel it too or whether you need time to process everything else first. I can wait, but I won't lie about what you are to me. She should have been overwhelmed, should have demanded space to process emotional revelation on top of identity crisis. Should have reminded him that she was still technically Omega until testing proved otherwise and made bonds between Omegas and Alpha Kings were unheard of. Instead, Kara squeezed his hand and let herself acknowledge what her wolf had been trying to tell her since first meeting his golden gaze across blood-soaked battlefield. I feel it, too. The smile that transformed Elias's face was brilliant enough to rival the sun. But before he could respond, urgent knocking interrupted the moment. "Sire." Captain Leonard's rough voice carried through the door. "We have a situation. The Council of Alphas has called emergency session. They're demanding your presence immediately." Elias's expression darkened, but he didn't release Kara's hand. And the stated reason. They say a credible threat to territorial stability has emerged, requiring immediate address. Leonard paused. "Sire, they know about her, and they're calling for her execution before she can claim Silver Crest rights." The warmth that had filled the room moments before evaporated as political reality crashed back over them. Kara saw protective fury flash across Elias's face before he controlled it with visible effort. "Tell them I'll attend their session," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority despite obvious anger. "And tell them that anyone who threatens what's mine will discover exactly why my family has held royal authority for 300 years. He turned back to Kara, golden eyes blazing with promise and possession. "Stay here. Don't leave these rooms until I return. I'll handle the council." "They're going to demand you give me up," Kara said, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. "Choosing me means choosing conflict with every major Alpha family." "Yes," Elias agreed, leaning forward to press his forehead against hers in gesture of intimacy that stole her breath. "It does, and I choose you anyway." Then he was gone, leaving Carrara alone, with the knowledge that the mate bond she just acknowledged might cost him everything he'd built, and that powerful wolves were already gathering to eliminate the threat she represented before she could claim her heritage. The battle for her survival was just beginning. And this time, the enemies wouldn't be rogues on a battlefield, but political forces that had successfully destroyed her entire family once before. Chapter 5. The Council's Demand. The hours after Elias left felt like years. Kara paced the luxurious rooms that had become her gilded cage, her mind racing through scenarios that grew progressively darker with each passing minute. Through the windows, she could see the royal compounds stretching below elegant buildings arranged around courtyards where warriors trained. And servants went about their duties with efficiency. That spoke of centuries-old tradition. She was somewhere in the heart of that carefully ordered world. A chaos element that threatened to upend political stability that had held for 2 decades. Angelita returned twice to check her wounds and bring food that Kara barely touched. The healer's worried glances suggested she understood exactly what was happening and disapproved of Kara being left alone with her thoughts during such crisis. "He'll protect you," Angelita said during her second visit, settling beside Carrara on the window seat where she'd been watching the compound's activities with hollow attention. "His Majesty doesn't make promises he can't keep." "What if protecting me costs him everything?" Kara asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing since Leonard's announcement. "The Council of Alphas, that's every major territorial leader, isn't it? If they unite against him, they won't. Angelita interrupted with certainty that seemed unshakable. Oh, they'll bluster and threaten and make demands. But when it comes down to actual confrontation with King Elias, most of them will remember why his family has held royal authority for 3 centuries. They're not invincible, but they're close enough that smart wolves don't challenge them without overwhelming cause. And if they decide, I'm overwhelming cause. Angelita's expression grew serious. Then we discover whether prophesies about high alphas uniting territories were metaphor or prediction. Because if you truly are what everyone suspects, you're not just a political inconvenience to be eliminated. You're a fundamental shift in pack dynamics that no amount of council authority can suppress permanently. The conviction in her voice should have been comforting. Instead, it reinforced how much pressure was building around Kara's existence forces that would eventually demand resolution one way or another. As afternoon shifted toward evening, Bridget arrived with fresh clothes and apologetic expression. His Majesty sent instructions. The council has demanded your presence at their session. The Kara's stomach dropped. They want to confront me directly. They want to assess whether you represent genuine threat or simply confused Omega, who got lucky during combat crisis. Bridget's tone made clear what she thought of that characterization. His Majesty tried to refuse, but council law gives them right to examine potential claimants to extinct bloodlines before making territorial decisions. In other words, they want to intimidate me into denying my heritage before it's even been confirmed. Kara said, understanding the political calculation behind the demand. Exactly. Bridget held up the clothes' formal attire in deep blue that marked them as appropriate for someone of uncertain but potentially significant status. But His Majesty has a plan. Trust him. An hour later, Kara found herself being escorted through corridors that grew progressively more imposing as they approached the council chambers. Warriors lined the halls at regular intervals, not threatening. But their presence made clear that this was territory where power concentrated and decisions were made that affected thousands. Captain Leonard met them outside massive doors carved with symbols representing every major pack in the Northern Territories. His scarred face was grim, but not unsympathetic as he studied Kara's appearance. You look appropriately dignified, he said with approval. Remember, you don't have to answer questions you're uncomfortable with. His Majesty will intervene if they push too hard. Your job is simply to be yourself and let them see you're not some political manipulator trying to exploit ancient bloodlines for personal gain. Just myself, Kara repeated, wishing that instruction felt more achievable. The problem is I'm not sure who that is anymore. Then show them the wolf who survived impossible odds and fought with honor even when abandoned by her own pack, Leonard said firmly. That's more than enough. The doors opened, revealing a circular chamber designed to emphasize equality among territorial leaders, while simultaneously making clear that this was space where serious matters were decided. 7 alphas sat in high-back chairs arranged around a central floor where Kara was clearly meant to stand, positioning that would force her to turn constantly to address different speakers, keeping her literally and figuratively off balance. King Elias occupied the chair directly opposite the entrance, his golden eyes tracking her approach with intensity that felt like physical touch across the distance. On his right sat an older male with silver hair and expression of calculated neutrality. On his left, a female alpha whose amber eyes studied Kara with assessment that suggested she was cataloging weaknesses for later exploitation. The other 4 alphas ranged from middle age to ancient, their combined authority pressing against Ka's consciousness like weight that made breathing difficult. These were wolves who commanded thousands, whose decisions shaped territorial politics across the continent, and they were all focused entirely on her. Carol Lawrence, said the silver-haired alpha on Elias's right, his voice carrying formal authority that marked him as council speaker. I am Joshua Padilla, alpha of West March Territory and current council chair. You've been summoned to address questions regarding your heritage and potential claims to extinct bloodlines. Kara moved to the center of the chamber, forcing herself to stand straight despite exhaustion and intimidation that threatened to buckle her knees. I understand, Alpha Padilla. Let's begin with basics, said the female alpha on Elias's left, her tone suggesting she'd already formed conclusions and was simply going through motions. You claim to be Silver Crest heir. I claim nothing, Kara replied carefully. Remembering Leonard's advice about not being pushed into positions she hadn't actually taken. King Elias suspects I may have Silverist heritage based on combat capabilities I demonstrated. Formal testing hasn't been completed, but you don't deny the possibility. Pressed another alpha younger male, with calculating eyes that reminded Carrara uncomfortably of Alpha Darling. I don't know enough to deny or confirm anything, Kara said. Honestly, until 3 days ago, I believed I was Omega with normal heritage. Recent events have suggested that belief may have been incorrect, but I'm not making claims about bloodlines I can't prove. How convenient, the female alpha said coldly. Demonstrate impossible capabilities, accept royal protection, but avoid actually claiming rights that would trigger legitimate challenges to your status. That's enough, Luella, Elias said quietly. But his voice carried power that made the female alpha Luella subside with visible reluctance. Kara isn't playing political games. She's processing discovery that her entire life may have been built on deceptions designed by others for purposes she's still uncovering. And you're certain those deceptions exist? Joshua asked, his attention shifting to Elias, with sharpness that suggested he was more interested in the king's motivations than Ka's heritage. You're basing serious accusations against established pacts on supposition and circumstantial evidence. I'm basing investigation on evidence that an Omega demonstrated capability inconsistent with her designated rank while wielding weapons that should have been inert in her hands. Elias replied with steel underlying conversational tone. Whether that leads to discovery of Silver Crest heritage or simply reveals systematic abuse of vulnerable pack members, investigation is justified under royal authority to ensure pack governance meets minimum welfare standards. The political maneuvering was dizzying. Kara realized that Elias was deliberately framing investigation in terms that went beyond her individual case, making it about oversight of pack treatment of Omegas generally, rather than specifically about bloodline claims that would trigger territorial disputes. Your Majesty, said an ancient alpha, whose silver-white hair and deeply lined face suggested he'd witnessed centuries of pack politics. With respect, your personal interest in this particular Omega seems to exceed professional concern for welfare oversight. Would you care to explain why you're investing royal authority so heavily in one wolf of questionable heritage? The question hung in the air like trap waiting to spring. Admitting mate bond would complicate political situation exponentially, but lying would undermine trust that other alphas placed in royal authority. Elias met the ancient alpha's gaze steadily. My interest in Kara's welfare is both professional and personal. My wolf recognized something in her that transcends political calculations. Whether that recognition proves accurate regarding bloodline heritage remains to be seen. But I won't apologize for following instincts that have guided my family's rule successfully for 3 centuries. He's claiming mate bond, Luella said flatly, her amber eyes narrowing. You're telling this council that you've bonded with an Omega of completely unknown heritage, potentially complicating territorial politics for personal attachment. I'm telling this council that I'm investigating serious questions about pack governance and welfare oversight. Elias corrected firmly. My personal feelings about Kara don't change the validity of those questions or my authority to pursue answers, but they do change your objectivity," Joshua observed quietly. "If you've bonded with her, you have vested interest in discovering heritage that justifies that bond. An Omega mate would be problematic for royal succession, but a Silver Crest heir would be quite different matter." The political calculation was laid bare with brutal clarity. If Kara proved to be Omega, Elias's mate choice would be seen as weakness that undermined his authority. But if she proved to be Alpha bloodline, suddenly the bond became strategic alliance that strengthened rather than compromised his position. "My objectivity remains intact," Elias said coldly, "but since Council seems concerned about potential conflicts of interest, I'm willing to accept third-party oversight of heritage testing. Choose your own healers to verify results. I'll cooperate fully with whatever validation process you deem necessary." The offer surprised several council members, their expressions shifting from hostile suspicion to calculation as they reassessed what Elias was proposing. "You'd allow Council App-appointed healers to conduct testing?" Joshua asked carefully. "Without royal interference or attempts to influence results, completely independent verification," Elias confirmed. "I want answers about Kara's heritage, not confirmation of conclusions I've already reached. If testing proves she's simply Omega with unusual stress response capabilities, I'll accept those results and adjust accordingly. And if testing proves Silver Crest heritage," the ancient Alpha asked, "what then?" "Then we address territorial complications that arise from legitimate heir survival using established legal frameworks for resolving bloodline succession disputes," Elias replied. "The same frameworks that were supposedly applied when Silverist was declared extinct." "Those frameworks assumed complete extinction," Luella said sharply. "They weren't designed to address scenarios where heirs survived in hiding for 2 decades before suddenly surfacing with convenient royal protection." "Nothing about this is convenient," Carrara said, her voice cutting through political debate with frustration she could no longer contain. "I didn't ask to discover my entire life was built on lies. I didn't choose to survive combat that killed trained warriors. And I certainly didn't plan to become political inconvenience that powerful alphas want eliminated before I complicate their comfortable territorial arrangements." The chamber fell silent as council members turned their full attention to her. Kara forced herself to meet their gazes one by one, refusing to show the fear that threatened to choke her. "I don't know if I'm Silver Crest," she continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I don't know if I'm actually Omega or if my rank was deliberately suppressed for political convenience. What I do know is that people died on that battlefield because Pax decided some lives were worth saving and others weren't. And I know that I survived because something inside me refused to accept that assessment." "A pretty speech," Luella said dismissively, "but it doesn't address the fundamental question. If you are Silver Crest, what do you intend to do with that heritage? Will you demand return of territories, challenge existing authority, claim rights that have been considered settled for 20 years? "I don't know," Carrara admitted, "because until I understand what was done to my family and why, I can't make informed decisions about anything. But I think I deserve the chance to find those answers before being executed for representing theoretical threat to political stability." "No one is suggesting execution," Joshua said, though his tone suggested that option had definitely been discussed before Kara's arrival. "Aren't you?" Kara challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. "Alpha Padilla, you summoned me here to assess whether I'm genuine threat. That assessment only matters if you're considering eliminating threats you identify. So, let's dispense with polite fiction. And this council wants to know if killing me now will be easier than dealing with complications my survival represents." The blunt acknowledgement of unspoken subtext sent ripples of reaction through the council members. Several looked uncomfortable, while others showed grudging respect for her directness. "You're remarkably perceptive for someone raised as Omega," the ancient Alpha observed with something approaching approval. "That kind of political instinct isn't taught. It's inherited or developed through years of learning to read subtle cues because survival depended on understanding what powerful people wanted before they had to say it explicitly," Kara countered. "Omegas become very good at reading dominance dynamics. It's how we avoid getting killed for inconveniencing our betters." Elias's expression flickered with something that might have been pain, as her words highlighted exactly how thoroughly her life had been constrained by rank designation that may have been deliberately false. "I propose compromise," Joshua said, into the weighted silence. "We allow independent heritage testing, as His Majesty suggests, with council oversight to ensure validity. Testing takes 3 days, during which time Kara remains under royal protection in secure location, where she can't be influenced or threatened by parties with vested interests in particular outcomes. And after testing Luella, pressed what happens when results confirm or deny Silvercrest heritage. If testing confirms Omega status with unusual abilities, she returns to her pack with council recommendation that her capabilities be properly developed rather than suppressed." Joshua replied, his tone suggesting he'd been planning this compromise for some time. If testing confirms Alpha bloodline unconnected to Silverest, similar arrangement applies with opportunity for rank reclassification. And if testing confirms Silverest heritage, the ancient Alpha asked quietly. Joshua's expression grew serious. "Then we convene formal bloodline tribunal to address territorial claims and succession rights according to established legal frameworks." But he raised his voice as several council members started to object. Any decisions made regarding territorial adjustments would be implemented gradually, over a period of years, rather than immediately allowing affected families time to prepare for transitions. It was elegant political solution that gave everyone something they wanted while avoiding immediate crisis. Kara would get her answers. Elias would get validation for his investigation, and the council would get time to prepare for complications rather than facing immediate upheaval. "I can accept those terms," Elias said carefully, "provided the council guarantees Kara's safety during testing period and commits to accepting whatever results emerge from independent verification." "Agreed," Joshua said, looking around the chamber for confirmation. One by one, the other alphas nodded, some with obvious reluctance, but all apparently accepting that this compromise was better than immediate confrontation with royal authority. "There's one more condition," the ancient Alpha said, his piercing gaze fixed on Kara. "Before we commit to this process, I want to see what you can do. Demonstrate the capabilities that convinced His Majesty you're worth protecting." "I'm injured," Kara protested. "I barely survived the last combat, and I'm not fully healed." "Not full combat." The ancient Alpha clarified simple demonstration of awareness and coordination that supposedly indicates bloodline heritage. "If you truly possess Silvercrest capabilities, you should be able to display them under controlled conditions without risk of serious injury." Kara looked to Elias, who was clearly struggling between protective instinct and political necessity. Finally, he nodded slightly. "A demonstration only, no actual combat, and if she shows signs of distress, it stops immediately." "Agreed," Joshua said. "Captain Leonard, would you assist with arranging appropriate demonstration?" Leonard, who'd been standing silent guard near the doors, stepped forward with expression that suggested he'd been expecting this development. "I can provide suitable testing environment." Alpha Padilla. 20 minutes later, Kara found herself in a training courtyard surrounded by council members who descended from their chamber to observe her demonstration with predatory interest. Leonard had arranged for 6 warriors to serve as coordination test. They would move through combat patterns, while Kara tried to anticipate and respond to their movements without any prior practice or briefing on their techniques. "Whenever you're ready," Leonard said, his rough voice carrying encouragement despite the pressure of watching alphas. "Trust your instincts." Kara closed her eyes, reaching for the awareness that had flowed through her on the battlefield. For a long moment, she felt nothing except her own racing heartbeat and the weight of expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Then, like switch being flipped, awareness crashed through her consciousness with force that stole her breath. She could feel the 6 warriors as clearly as if they were extensions of her own body, knew where they would move before they committed to actions, understood their tactics and strategies through perception that bypassed normal observation. And beyond them, she could feel Elias's blazing presence that anchored everything else. His attention focused on her with intensity that felt like physical touch. The warriors began their patterns, and Kara moved without conscious thought. She flowed through spaces that wouldn't exist for another second, positioning herself where attacks would miss by inches and where defensive openings would appear before the warriors themselves recognized them. She didn't fight, simply demonstrated awareness that allowed her to exist within combat patterns, as if she'd trained with these specific warriors for years. When Leonard called halt after perhaps 30 seconds, Kara stood at the exact center of the 6 warriors, breathing hard but uninjured. Around her, the warriors stared with expressions ranging from shock to awe. "That's not possible," one of them whispered. "We didn't signal or coordinate. She just knew where we'd be." In the watching alphas, Carrara saw calculation shifting to certainty. Whatever doubts they'd maintained about her capabilities had just been erased by demonstration that defied explanation through normal pack dynamics. "Well," the ancient alpha said into the stunned silence, "I believe we have our answer about whether independent testing is worthwhile. That level of awareness doesn't exist in normal omegas or even normal alphas." Joshua nodded slowly, his expression grave. 3 days of independent testing under council oversight, and then we face whatever truth emerges." His gaze shifted to Elias. "Your Majesty, I hope you understand what you may have started here. If she truly is silver, the political complications will reshape territorial governance for decades." "I understand," Elias replied, moving to stand beside Kara with protective presence that made his position clear regardless of political consequences, "and I stand by my choice to investigate, rather than ignore what she represents." As the council members dispersed to arrange logistics for independent testing, Kara felt the weight of what had just been set in motion. 3 days to discover whether her entire identity was lie. 3 days before powerful families learned whether she represented existential threat to their authority, and 3 days before she would have to decide what to do with whatever truth emerged from testing that would define the rest of her life. The battle for her heritage was about to begin, and this time the weapons would be truth and law rather than swords and claws. Chapter 6: Blood and Truth. The testing facility was located in neutral territory, 3 hours' ride from King Elias's compound, an ancient stone structure that had served as diplomatic meeting ground for centuries. Its thick walls and warded chambers designed to prevent outside influence or interference during sensitive negotiations. Kara arrived under heavy escort 20 of Elias's warriors, plus an equal number provided by the council to ensure no accusations of tampering could arise. The king himself rode beside her, his presence a constant warmth in her awareness that helped keep anxiety at manageable levels. "The head healer is Diana Avula," Elias said quietly as they approached the facility's gates. "She served the council for 40 years and is considered absolutely incorruptible. If anyone can determine truth about your heritage without political bias, it's her, And if the truth is something neither of us wants to hear? Carrara asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since the council session. Then we deal with it together. His golden eyes met hers with intensity that made her wolf practically sing. Whatever the testing reveals, Kara, you're not facing it alone. The facility's interior was surprisingly comfortable despite its fortress-like exterior. Kara was shown to quarters that were modest compared to the royal compound, but still far nicer than anything she'd experienced in Clearwater Pack. A sitting room connected to a bedroom and private bathing chamber with windows that looked out over gardens maintained with obvious care. Dina Avila arrived within the hour, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes and presence that suggested she'd witnessed enough political machinations to be unimpressed by rank or authority. She studied Kara with professional assessment that felt less invasive than simply thorough. I understand you've had quite an eventful few days, she said, settling into a chair across from where Kara sat perched nervously on a sofa. Before we begin formal testing, I want to hear your story in your own words. No political filtering. No concern about what answers might be convenient, just truth as you understand it. Kara took a breath and began talking. She described her childhood in Clearwater Pack, the daily supplements Chelsea had insisted were necessary, the careful suppression of curiosity about her parents. She explained the battlefield, the impossible survival, the capabilities that had manifested without warning or explanation. Dina listened without interruption, her expression neutral, but her eyes tracking details with precision that suggested she was cataloging information for later analysis. The supplements you described, she said when Kara finished. Do you remember what they tasted like? Any specific characteristics? Bitter even with honey added to mask it, and they left a metallic aftertaste that lingered for hours. Kara frowned, trying to recall details she'd never questioned as a child. Sometimes they made me drowsy, especially if Chelsea increased the dosage. Increased dosage under what circumstances? When I was restless or questioned things too much. When I showed interest in combat training or asked about my parents, the pattern was obvious now in retrospect, though it had seemed like normal parental concern at the time. She said I needed extra supplements during difficult phases to keep me healthy. Deanna's expression grew grim. What you're describing is consistent with long-term administration of Wolf's Bane derivative compounds designed to suppress supernatural capabilities. The dosage would need to be carefully calibrated. Too much would cause permanent damage. Too little would allow manifestation of abilities being suppressed. So, it's true, Kara whispered. Chelsea really was deliberately keeping me weak. It appears so. But that raises an interesting question. Who taught her the proper dosages? Wolf's Bane suppression requires expertise most common pack members don't possess. Someone with extensive knowledge of bloodline genetics and pharmaceutical applications would have needed to provide ongoing guidance. The implication was chilling. Chelsea hadn't acted alone in suppressing Kara's capabilities. Someone with sophisticated knowledge had been directing her efforts, ensuring the suppression was effective, without being obviously harmful. Can you determine who that someone was through the testing? Kara asked. Possibly. If the compounds left traceable markers in your system, we might be able to identify their specific formulation. That information could point toward particular healers or pharmaceutical specialists who had access to necessary expertise. Deanna stood, gesturing for Kara to follow. But first, let's establish your actual bloodline heritage. Everything else builds from that foundation. The testing chamber was circular, its walls carved with symbols that Kara didn't recognize, but that made her skin prickle with awareness of power. At the center stood a raised platform surrounded by channels cut into the stone floor, designed, Dina explained, to contain and direct bloodline energy during testing procedures. The process is uncomfortable, but not dangerous, Dina said, guiding Kara to stand at the platform center. I'll take a blood sample and introduce it to reagents that respond to specific genetic markers. The patterns that form will indicate your bloodline heritage with precision that can't be falsified or manipulated. How long does it take? The initial reaction occurs within minutes. Full analysis requires several hours, as different reagents are tested in sequence. Deanna prepared a blade with practiced efficiency. Are you ready? Kara nodded, watching as the healer made a precise cut across her palm that stung sharply. Blood welled up, darker than she expected, and Deanna collected it in a crystal vial that seemed to shimmer with internal light. The healer added the first reagent, a silver liquid that mixed with Karara's blood and began to glow with intensity that made her squint against the brightness. Dina poured the mixture into the channels carved in the floor, and it flowed outward in patterns that resembled tree branches spreading from a central trunk. Interesting, Diana murmured, studying the patterns with frown of concentration. Very interesting indeed. What does it mean? Kara asked, trying to decipher meaning from shapes that seemed to shift and change as she watched. It means your bloodline is significantly more complex than simple omega or even basic alpha heritage. Diana added a second reagent, this one gold, and watched as new patterns formed, overlaying the first. You're carrying markers from multiple noble lines, which suggests your ancestry includes deliberate breeding for specific capabilities. Multiple lines? I don't understand. Noble families occasionally arrange marriages to combine bloodline strengths, creating offspring with enhanced capabilities from both parents. Dina added a third reagent, and the pattern suddenly blazed with silver-white light, so intense that both women had to look away. But what you're showing is unprecedented, at least 4 distinct noble bloodlines with dominant expression, rather than recessive traits. Is that unusual? Unusual doesn't begin to cover it. Most wolves carry noble markers in recessive form present but not expressed. What you're showing suggests all 4 lines are actively manifesting, which should be genetically impossible without. Deanna trailed off, her expression shifting from professional interest to something approaching shock. Without what? Kara pressed. Without the Silver Crest breeding protocols. Dana's voice had gone quiet, with what might have been awe or might have been fear. They were the only family that developed methodology for ensuring multiple noble bloodlines expressed dominantly in offspring. They used it to create warriors with combined capabilities that transcended what any single bloodline could produce. The silver-white light in the channels began to form recognizable shapes, symbols that matched carvings on the chamber walls. Diana moved around the platform, studying the patterns with intensity that suggested she was seeing something of profound significance. These markers, she said finally, pointing to a cluster of symbols that pulsed with particularly bright light. These are silverist primary genetic signatures. There's no question about your heritage. You're directly descended from the main bloodline, probably no more than 1 or 2 generations removed from the last acknowledged family members. Karara's legs suddenly felt weak, forcing her to sit down on the platform despite Diana's protest about disrupting the testing patterns. Everything she'd suspect, every impossible theory that had seemed too dramatic to believe all of it, confirmed by blood that didn't lie. So, I really am Silverest heir, she whispered. You're more than that. Diana knelt beside the patterns, tracing one particularly complex symbol with her finger. This marker here, it indicates high alpha potential. The genetic capability to perceive and integrate pack bonds across multiple territories, combined with your other bloodline expressions, you're not just an heir to an extinct noble house. You're potentially the most powerful wolf born in the last 2 centuries. The weight of that revelation pressed down on Kara like physical force. She'd gone from anonymous omega to potential high alpha in less than a week. and her mind struggled to process implications that seemed to expand exponentially with each new piece of information. What does that mean practically? She managed to ask. Being high alpha, it means you have genetic capability to unite all northern territories under single pack bond, creating cohesive governance structure that transcends traditional pack divisions. Deanna sat back on her heels, studying Kara, with expression that mingled respect and concern. The Silver Crest were prophesied to produce such a wolf, eventually one who could end the territorial conflicts and power struggles that have plagued our people for centuries. Most thought it was metaphor or wishful thinking. But your bloodline markers suggest the prophecy was literal prediction of genetic development. I don't want to unite territories, Kara protested. I just want to understand who I am and what happened to my family. What you want may be irrelevant, Diana said gently. Your existence threatens political structures that powerful families have spent decades establishing. They eliminated your bloodline once to prevent exactly this scenario. Now that you've survived and been identified, they'll face choice between accepting fundamental change to territorial governance or attempting to eliminate you before you can claim your heritage. The Council promised me safety during testing. The Council promised you 3 days. After that, Dina shrugged expressively. Political promises are only as reliable as the convenience they serve. Once these results are reported, you become existential threat to families who control vast territories and resources. Some will seek alliance with you, hoping to benefit from association with potential high alpha. Others will seek your death with every resource they can mobilize. The brutal assessment of her situation made Kara's stomach twist with anxiety that bordered on nausea. What about King Elias? He promised to protect me. His Majesty can protect you from direct assault, and probably from most assassination attempts, but he can't protect you from political maneuvering that could isolate him from other territorial leaders and undermine his authority. Diana's expression softened slightly, though I suspect he'll try regardless of cost. The mate bond between you is already partially formed. Even if you haven't completed the bonding ritual, his wolf won't allow him to abandon you, even if political calculations suggested it was wise. How do you know about the mate bond? I'm a healer with 40 years' experience assessing supernatural bonds. I can see the resonance between you two, even when you're in separate buildings. Diana smiled slightly. Besides, the way he looks at you would make it obvious even to completely non-supernatural observers. The man is utterly devoted, which is both beautiful and potentially catastrophic for territorial politics. Before Kara could formulate response to that assessment, urgent knocking interrupted their conversation. One of the council guards entered, his expression grim. Healer Avala, we have a situation. A delegation has arrived, demanding immediate access to the testing subject. They claim she's stolen property that was removed from their territory without proper authorization. Diana's expression darkened. Who's making such absurd claim? Alpha Darling of Clearwater Pack, accompanied by 10 warriors and a legal representative, prepared to argue pack sovereignty before council oversight. Kara felt ice run through her veins. Darling had apparently decided that allowing council testing was too risky. Better to reclaim her under legal pretense and deal with consequences later than to allow testing that would confirm heritage, making her untouchable under territorial law. Tell them testing is in progress and cannot be interrupted, Deanna said firmly. Council authority supersedes pack territorial claims during sanctioned heritage verification. They're prepared to contest that interpretation. Healer, their legal representative, is citing precedents where pack sovereignty took priority over. I don't care what precedents they're citing. Dina interrupted her voice, taking on steel that suggested she wasn't impressed by legal maneuvering. This facility is under council protection during testing procedures. If they want to challenge that protection, They can take their arguments to formal tribunal after testing concludes. Yes, healer. The guard hesitated. However, they've also brought what they claim is evidence that the testing subject was deliberately concealing noble heritage to avoid pack obligations. They're suggesting she's complicit in fraud rather than victim of suppression. The political calculation was clever and vicious. If Darling could establish that Kara had known about her heritage and concealed it deliberately, he could argue she'd violated pack law and forfeited protection normally afforded to noble bloodlines. It would reframe her from victim to criminal, undermining sympathy that might otherwise prevent her elimination. That's a lie, Kara said, anger cutting through fear. I didn't know anything about my heritage until 3 days ago. How could I conceal what I didn't know existed? Logic won't matter if they can create enough doubt to justify challenging council protection, Dina said grimly. She turned to the guard. Where is King Elias currently? In the diplomatic wing with Captain Leonard, dealing with separate delegation from families whose territories include former Silverist lands. They're demanding advanced notice of testing results to prepare legal challenges if needed. Political forces were mobilizing faster than anyone had anticipated. Kara realized multiple families apparently coordinating efforts to either control or eliminate threats she represented before testing could conclusively prove her heritage and rights. We need to accelerate the testing, Diana decided. Get me the remaining reagents immediately. If we can complete full bloodline analysis before Darling's legal maneuvering gains traction, Council will have harder time justifying any interference with established heritage rights. As the guard hurried off to fetch supplies, Diana turned back to Kara with expression that mingled determination and concern. What happens in the next few hours will likely determine whether you survive this situation or become another convenient casualty in territorial politics. I need you to trust me completely and follow my instructions precisely. Can you do that? Kara thought about the blood pattern still glowing in the floor channels. Proof of heritage she'd never suspected she possessed. She thought about Elias fighting political battles to protect her, while she stood in this chamber discovering truths that would reshape territorial governance. And she thought about her parents who'd apparently died, trying to keep her safe from exactly the forces now gathering to eliminate her before she could claim what was rightfully hers. Yes, she said clearly, meeting Deanna's eyes with resolve that surprised her. Tell me what you need. I need you to access your full capabilities without reservation or fear. The final testing requires active expression of bloodline markers, which means deliberately triggering the abilities that manifested during combat. Deanna began preparing additional reagents with practice speed. Can you recreate the awareness state you experienced on the battlefield? I think so. It came naturally when I needed it. Good, because we're about to need it desperately. Diana glanced toward the door, where sounds of raised voices suggested Darling's delegation was arguing with guards about access. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, stay focused on the testing. Let Council guards and His Majesty handle political confrontation. Your job is proving beyond any doubt that you're exactly what your blood says you are. Kara closed her eyes, reaching for the awareness that had saved her life multiple times already. For a moment, she felt only anxiety and exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her concentration. Then, like dawn breaking across a dark horizon, power flooded through her consciousness with force that made her gasp aloud. She could feel everyone in the facility, council guards and Elias's warriors, political delegations and healers' assistants, all of them blazing in her awareness with clarity that transcended normal pack sense. She could perceive their emotional states, their tactical positioning, their relationships to each other through bonds, both pack-based and personal. And at the center of everything, she felt Elias as a sun around which lesser lights orbited. His attention was focused entirely on the confrontation with territorial families. But underneath that surface concentration, she could sense his awareness of her constant monitoring that suggested he was ready to abandon diplomacy in an instant if she appeared threatened. "Magnificent," Diana breathed, watching as the blood patterns in the floor channels blazed with silver-white light that filled the chamber. "You're accessing high alpha awareness naturally without training or formal development of capabilities. This level of instinctive expression." She shook her head in wonder. "The Council won't be able to deny your heritage. Not with this evidence, but even as power flowed through Kara with intensity that felt both exhilarating and terrifying, she sensed new complication emerging through her enhanced awareness. Someone was approaching the facility from outside. Multiple someones moving with coordination that spoke of military precision rather than political delegation. "Dina," she said urgently, her eyes snapping open. "We have incoming force. Approximately 30 wolves moving to surround the facility perimeter. They're not council guards or any delegation I can sense already here." The healer's expression shifted from wonder to alarm. "We're north and east approaches, coordinating to establish complete perimeter within minutes." Kara's awareness tracked their movements with precision. That would have seemed impossible days ago. "They're carrying— I don't know how I know this, but they're carrying silver chains and suppression compounds. They're planning to breach the facility and take me by force." Deanna moved with speed that belied her age, running to the chamber entrance and shouting for guards. "Breach attempt in progress. Secure all entrances and get His Majesty here immediately." Through her enhanced awareness, Kara felt Elias's attention snap toward her location, with focus so intense it felt like physical touch across the distance. His alarm blazed through their developing bond, followed immediately by protective fury that made her wolf whimper with mixture of fear and satisfaction. The battle for her heritage was about to become literal rather than political. And this time, the enemies weren't rogues driven by instinct, but coordinated forces prepared to eliminate a threat they'd thought destroyed 2 decades ago. The Silver Crest bloodline had survived extinction once. Whether it could survive the second attempt would be determined in the next few minutes and might depend on capabilities. Kara barely understood, let alone controlled. Chapter 7. Silver Chains and Savage Hearts. The testing chamber's door burst open as Captain Leonard arrived with 6 warriors, their weapons already drawn, and expressions grim with combat readiness. Behind them came Elias, his golden eyes blazing with fury that made the temperature in the room seem to drop despite the power radiating from his frame. "How many?" he demanded, his attention fixed on Kara with intensity that made her breath catch despite the crisis unfolding around them. 30 that I can sense clearly," Kara replied, her awareness still tracking the approaching force with precision that surprised her. "They're splitting into 3 groups, 10 approaching main entrance, 10 moving to secure rear exits, and 10 positioning to breach through the east garden wall. You can sense their tactical deployment from inside this chamber?" Leonard asked, his scarred face showing shock that suggested such capability exceeded even his understanding of supernatural abilities. "I can sense everyone." "Within approximately half a mile," Kara admitted, realizing only as she spoke how unprecedented that range must be. "Their positions, emotional states, and basic intentions are all clear in my awareness." Elias and Leonard exchanged glances, weighted with meaning she couldn't quite decipher. "That's high alpha sensing at levels that usually require decades of development," Elias said quietly. "You're manifesting capabilities instinctively that most wolves never achieve, even with extensive training." "We can discuss her impressive talents after we've dealt with immediate threat," Deanna said sharply, moving to and beside Kara with protective stance suggested the healer was prepared to fight despite her advanced age and non-warrior status. Who sent them? Which family is desperate enough to breach council-protected facility? Through her enhanced awareness, Kara perceived something that made her stomach drop with horrible understanding. They're not from a single pack. The force includes wolves from at least 3 different territories, coordinated by someone outside the normal pack hierarchy. Mercenaries. Leonard spat the word like a curse. Wolves who've abandoned pack bonds in exchange for coin and the freedom to operate outside territorial law. Led by someone with extensive knowledge of facility layout and security protocols, Elias added, his expression darkening further. This is an opportunistic attack. It's coordinated assault by forces that have been planning and preparing specifically for this scenario. They knew I'd be here, Kara said, understanding crystallizing with chilling clarity. Someone on the council, or someone with access to council information, told them exactly where and when to find me most vulnerable. The implications rippled through the room like shockwave. If council security had been compromised, then nowhere under official protection would be truly safe. Political forces opposed to Kar's survival had apparently decided that eliminating her was worth the risk of violating diplomatic protocols and challenging royal authority directly. Sire, Leonard said urgently, we need to evacuate her to more secure location immediately. This facility wasn't designed to withstand sustained assault by forces that size. Agreed. Elias moved to Kara's side, his proximity making her wolf practically vibrate with mixture of fear and desire that was thoroughly inappropriate given their circumstances. But we'll need to fight our way through perimeter establishing. Can you maintain your awareness during movement and combat? I think so. It feels natural now that it's activated. Kara stood from the platform, noting distantly that the blood patterns in the floor channels were still glowing with silver-white light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. But I don't have weapons or combat training beyond what manifested instinctively during the battlefield crisis. You won't need weapons if you can provide tactical intelligence during engagement, Leonard said, already moving toward the door with efficiency that spoke of extensive combat experience. Your role is staying alive and telling us where enemies are positioned. We'll handle the actual fighting. Bridget appeared in the doorway, her expression grim but unsurprised by the crisis. Sire Council guards are mobilizing to defend facility perimeter, but they're spread thin, covering multiple access points. The attackers are using coordination and timing that suggests inside knowledge of guard rotation patterns. How long until they breach? Elias asked. Minutes at most. The main entrance force is already engaging council guards, and the rear exit team has explosives that will breach those doors regardless of defensive preparations. Bridget's amber eyes shifted to Kara, with assessment that suggested she was calculating survival probabilities. We have narrow window to evacuate before they establish complete containment. Through her enhanced awareness, Kara tracked the approaching forces with precision that made strategy obvious, despite her complete lack of formal tactical training. The East Garden Wall force. They're hanging back, not engaging yet. They're waiting for us to evacuate through that route so they can ambush while we're exposed and mobile. Smart, Leonard muttered. Drive us toward escape route they've prepared to trap. Classic herding tactic. So we don't use the garden wall, Elias said, his tone carrying absolute certainty. Despite the tactical problems that decision created, we go through the main entrance force directly. They're expecting us to avoid confrontation, so aggressive assault will catch them off balance. Sire, that's 10 mercenaries specifically positioned to prevent exit through main entrance, Bridget protested. Even with your capabilities, I'm not planning to fight them alone. Elias's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Captain, how many warriors do we have currently in the facility? 15 of ours plus approximately 20 council guards who aren't caused by whatever intelligence leak allowed this attack. Leonard replied, "Not enough for frontal assault against prepared positions," Bridget said flatly. "It would be if we had tactical intelligence about their exact positions and coordination patterns." Elias countered, his golden eyes returning to Kara with intensity that made her realize what he was suggesting. "Can you track them precisely enough to guide our assault? Tell us where they're positioned when they're vulnerable, how they're coordinating with each other." Kara closed her eyes, letting her awareness expand to encompass the main entrance force with detail that should have been impossible from inside the facility. She could sense not just their positions, but their tactical thinking. The leader positioned slightly behind the others, coordinating through hand signals rather than verbal commands to maintain element of surprise. 3 archers on elevated positions providing covering fire for 7 ground fighters, arranged to create overlapping fields of attack that would devastate anyone trying to force passage. "Yes," she said, opening her eyes to meet Elias's gaze. "I can track them precisely. But Your Majesty, if I'm guiding tactical assault while we're moving under fire, I won't be able to defend myself effectively. You're gambling that your warriors can protect me, while simultaneously engaging enemies based on my intelligence. I'm gambling that my mate's capabilities are exactly as unprecedented as her bloodline suggests." Elias replied, his hand settling on her shoulder with warmth that sent tingles through her exhausted frame. "And I'm trusting my warriors to do what they've trained for, protecting what's precious while destroying threats to pack security." The casual acknowledgement of mate bond before his warriors should have felt presumptuous. But instead, it made something settle in Carrara's chest that had been anxious and uncertain since the moment this crisis began. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, she wouldn't face it alone. "How long to organize assault force?" Elias asked Leonard. 2 minutes if we skip detailed briefing and rely on tactical trust." The captain replied, "Do it. Tell our warriors and any council guards willing to follow royal command that we're breaching main entrance in 2 minutes. Specific positioning will be directed during engagement by intelligence from our tactical asset." Elias's grip on Kara's shoulder tightened briefly, and make absolutely clear that protecting her takes priority over everything else, including their own survival. As Leonard hurried off to organize the assault, Deanna appeared at Kara's side with a small vial filled with golden liquid that seemed to glow with internal light. "Drink this before you leave. It's concentrated healing elixir that will help you survive injuries sustained during evacuation." "You're expecting me to get hurt?" Kara asked, accepting the vial, with hands that wanted to tremble but refused to show weakness. "I'm expecting concentrated enemy fire to target you specifically once they realize you're providing tactical intelligence," Deanna said bluntly. "The elixir won't prevent injury, but it will keep minor wounds from becoming fatal during the time it takes to reach safety. Don't waste it by drinking until immediately before engagement starts." Bridget returned with leather armor that she helped Karan, with efficient movements that spoke of extensive practice arming warriors under time pressure. The armor was lighter than Kara expected, designed for mobility rather than heavy protection, appropriate for someone whose value lay in intelligence rather than direct combat capability. "Ready, positions." Leonard's voice carried from the corridor beyond the testing chamber. "Assault force assembling at staging point. We move on His Majesty's command." Elias guided Kara toward the door, his warriors forming protective formation around them that would make her the most defended element in the entire assault force. Through her enhanced awareness, she tracked the main entrance enemies as they began to realize something unexpected was developing, their tactical confidence wavering as they sensed organized resistance where they'd anticipated panicked evacuation attempts. "Drink the elixir," Elias murmured as they reached the staging point where 15 of his warriors plus 12 council guards stood ready for assault. And remember, you're not here to fight. You're here to see what others can't and tell us how to exploit that knowledge. Kara drank the golden liquid, feeling warmth spread through her system with speed that suggested powerful magic in its formulation. Her lingering injuries from the battlefield encounter suddenly felt less urgent, pain fading to manageable background awareness rather than sharp distraction. "Main entrance force," she said, closing her eyes to focus her awareness with precision. The assault would require 10 mercenaries total. 3 archers positioned on the upper colonnade, east, center, and west positions, providing overlapping fields of fire. 7 ground fighters arranged in 2-layer defense. Front line of 4 creating shield wall across the entrance. Second line of 3 positioned to exploit openings and prevent breakthrough even if front line is breached. Coordination method, Leonard asked tersely. Hand signals from leader positioned behind second line. He's the tactical brain, eliminate him, and the others will lose cohesion. Kara opened her eyes, meeting Leonard's gaze. But he's protected by positioning that makes direct assault extremely difficult. You'd need to breach both defensive lines to reach him, or we bypass ground forces entirely and eliminate the tactical coordinator. First, Elias said, his tone carrying satisfactions that suggested he'd just identified solution to their problem. "Bridget, you're our best archer. Can you eliminate the coordinator from inside the facility if given precise location?" "If I have clear line of sight and exact positioning, yes, sire," Bridget replied. "Then we create that opportunity." Elias turned to his assembled warriors. Standard breach assault with modification. Captain Leonard leads ground force against front defensive line with objective of forcing their attention downward and forward. While they're engaged, Bridget eliminates tactical coordinator from elevated position inside facility. Once coordinator is down, Kara will guide us through exploiting confusion in their remaining forces. It was elegant strategy that transformed Karara's unprecedented awareness into tactical weapon, rather than passive intelligence gathering, but it depended on split-second timing and absolute trust in capabilities she barely understood herself. One more complication. Kara said her awareness tracking new development that changed their tactical situation. The East Garden Wall force they're moving. They've realized we're not evacuating through that route and they're repositioning to reinforce main entrance defenders. How long until they arrive? Elias demanded 3 minutes. Maybe 4 if we're lucky. Kara's enhanced perception tracked their movement with precision that still amazed her. If we're still engaged with main entrance force, when reinforcements arrive, we'll be trapped between 2 enemy groups with nowhere to retreat. Then we breach fast and hard. Eliminate resistance before reinforcements can complicate engagement, Leonard said grimly. No holding back. No mercy for mercenaries who chose to attack council-protected facility. We go through them like they're not even there. Positions, Elias commanded, and 35 warriors moved with coordinated efficiency that spoke of absolute trust in their commanders. Kara found herself at the center of protective formation with Elias on one side, and 2 massive warriors whose size suggested they were specifically chosen to serve as physical shields if necessary. Through the facility corridors, she could hear sounds of combat as council guards engaged the main entrance force, shouts and clash of weapons that meant the battle had truly begun. "Bridget, prepare your shot," Elias ordered. "Kara will guide you to the coordinator's exact position. Everyone else, 30 seconds until we breach. Make every strike count." Kara closed her eyes again. Her awareness focused whizzing with laser precision on the tactical coordinator, positioned behind the main entrance defenders. She could sense his confidence faltering as he realized the facility's defenders were organizing coordinated response rather than panicking as expected. could feel his attention shifting between multiple tactical concerns, trying to adjust his force's positioning to account for developments his intelligence hadn't predicted. "He's moved slightly," she told Bridget quietly, 3 feet east of center position, partially concealed behind stone pillar, but exposing his left shoulder and head to sightline from our current elevation. "I see him," Bridget confirmed, her bow already drawn with arrow nocked and ready. "Waiting for your signal, sire." "Breach in 10 seconds," Elias said, his power beginning to manifest visibly as golden light flickered along his skin. 987. Carrara's awareness tracked everything simultaneously. The countdown, the reinforcements ceasing to arrive before breach could succeed. The tactical coordinator's growing alarm as he sensed something was wrong with his carefully planned ambush. The absolute focus of warriors surrounding her as they prepared to risk everything for her survival. 3, 2, 1, breach. Leonard's ground force exploded through the facility's main doors, with force that caught the entrance defenders completely off guard. The front defensive line barely had time to raise weapons before they were engaging warriors, whose fury and skill exceeded anything their mercenary experience had prepared them for. In the chaos of that first exchange, Bridget's arrow flew true and deadly. Kara sensed the tactical coordinator's shock in the instant before the arrow took him through the throat, his carefully maintained composure shattering into death rattle that no one else could hear over the combat din. "Coordinator down," she reported to Elias, remaining forces losing cohesion. Now what followed was brutal and efficient. Without central coordination, the entrance defenders fought as individuals rather than cohesive unit. Leonard's warriors exploited every opening Kara identified, her awareness guiding them to vulnerabilities that appeared for split seconds before closing again. 3 archers on colonnade, preparing to target you specifically. Kara warned, "East archer first. He's the most accurate." 2 of her protective detail moved with supernatural speed, intercepting arrows before they could reach her position, while Leonard's force surged forward through defensive lines that were crumbling without tactical leadership. "Second defensive line breaking," she reported. 4 remaining, 2 retreating toward rear positions, 2 attempting to rally for last stand. "Don't let them rally," Elias commanded, and his warriors moved like extensions of his will, eliminating resistance with efficiency that was almost beautiful in its deadly coordination. Within 90 seconds of the breach, the main entrance was secure. 11 mercenaries lay dead or dying, their assault broken by combination of tactical intelligence and warrior skill that had proven overwhelming despite their initial advantages. But through her awareness, Carrara felt the approaching reinforcements closing fast now only minutes away and moving with renewed urgency as they realized their main force had been eliminated. "We need to move now," she said urgently. "Rain arriving in under 2 minutes. If we're still here when they arrive, we won't be," Elias said, guiding her through the breached entrance and out into open air that felt like freedom after the facility's confines. Horses waited in the courtyard, prepared in advance by warriors who'd anticipated the need for rapid evacuation, despite hoping it wouldn't be necessary. Kara mounted with assistance from Bridget, her body protesting the movement despite the healing elixir's effects. Around her, warriors formed protective escort that would shield her from attack on all sides. "Where are we going?" she asked as the group began moving at speed that would cover distance quickly. If council security is compromised, nowhere under official protection is truly safe. "We're going to the one place where my authority is absolute and where anyone who wants to reach you will have to go through every warrior I command," Elias replied, his mount moving beside hers with practiced coordination. "We're going to my ancestral home, the Black Main Fortress that has never fallen to assault in 300 years of pack conflicts." Through her enhanced awareness, Kara felt the pursuing reinforcements realized they'd arrived too late, their targets already gone, and their assault force eliminated. She sensed their frustration and rage, but also their calculation that pursuing armed royal escort into King's own territory would be suicide, regardless of how much they'd been paid to eliminate their target. The immediate danger was passing. But as they rode toward the black main fortress with warriors surrounding her and power, still flowing through her awareness with unprecedented clarity, Sarah understood that this was only the beginning. Someone had organized coordinated assault on council-protected facility, had compromised diplomatic security, had mobilized mercenary forces willing to risk everything to prevent heritage from being confirmed. That kind of desperation and resources suggested enemies far more dangerous than simple territorial nobles, protecting convenient political arrangements. Someone wanted her dead badly enough to start what amounted to war, and they'd nearly succeeded despite royal protection and council oversight. The question was who? And the answer, Kara suspected, would reveal truths about her family's extinction that went far deeper than simple territorial politics. But those answers would have to wait. For now, survival took precedence over investigation. And survival meant accepting protection of an alpha king, whose mate bond was growing stronger with every moment they spent together. A bond that would either save them both or doom them to destruction when political forces finally mobilized with full fury against the threat they represented. Chapter 8. The Fortress and the Truth. The Black Main Fortress rose from the landscape like a mountain given purpose. Ancient stone walls that had weathered centuries of conflicts, towers that watched the surrounding territories with vigilant authority, and gates massive enough to require supernatural strength to open fully. As their escort approached, Kara felt power radiating from the structure itself, wards layered over generations, creating defenses that transcended merely physical barriers. "It's beautiful," she said, unable to suppress her awe despite exhaustion and lingering fear from their narrow escape. "It's home," Elias replied, his tone carrying pride and affection that suggested the fortress was more than simple defensive position. "My family has held this territory for 3 centuries, building defenses that have never been breached by external assault. Whatever enemies want to harm you, they'll have to get through walls that have stopped armies and wards that respond to my bloodline specifically." As they passed through the main gates, Kara sensed the wards, recognizing Elias and adjusting to allow passage, but also sensing her presence and responding with what felt almost like curiosity. The ancient magic woven into the fortress's foundations was assessing her, cataloging her bloodline markers, and apparently finding them acceptable because the pressure she'd initially felt eased into something approaching. "Welcome. The wards recognized you," Bridget observed with surprise that suggested such response was unusual. "They're keyed to Black Main bloodline primarily, but they just accepted you as if you belong here." "Hi, Alpha Genetics," Elias said quietly. The wards were originally established when pack structures were more fluid, designed to recognize leadership capability rather than specific bloodlines. They're responding to her inherent authority regardless of whether she's formally bonded to our pack. The implications made Kara's head spin. She'd gone from anonymous Omega to someone recognized by ancient magic as having legitimate claim to authority all within less than a week. The speed of transformation felt surreal, like she was living someone else's life rather than her own. The fortress interior was surprisingly comfortable despite its imposing exterior. Where Kara had expected cold stone and military efficiency, she found courtyards with gardens, corridors, hung with tapestries depicting pack history, and quarters that suggested people actually lived here rather than simply using the space for strategic purposes. She was shown to rooms in what Elias explained was the family wing private quarters normally reserved for the royal family, rather than guests or warriors. The suite was magnificent with sitting room, bedroom, and bathing chamber all decorated in deep blues and silvers that matched the black main colors. Windows looked out over territories that stretched to distant horizons, emphasizing the scope of power and responsibility that came with ruling such vast holdings. "These were my mother's rooms," Elias said as he personally escorted her inside, his warriors remaining in the corridor to provide security while granting them privacy. "She died 15 years ago, and they've remained empty since. But I think she would have approved of you having them." The casual intimacy of that statement made Carrara's breath catch. Offering her his mother's personal rooms wasn't just hospitality. It was statement of intent that declared her position in his life, regardless of whether formal mate bonding had occurred. "Your Majesty," she began, uncertain how to address the implications of what he was offering. "Elias," he corrected gently, moving to stand before her with proximity that made her wolf practically purr despite her exhaustion. "And before you protest about propriety or political complications, let me be clear about something. The moment those mercenaries breached council security to eliminate you, any pretense of handling this through diplomatic channels ended. You're under my personal protection now, housed in my private family wing, and anyone who wants to harm you will discover exactly what it means to threaten what's mine." "You're claiming me," Kara whispered, understanding the significance of his declaration publicly and permanently, regardless of political consequences. Yes, no hesitation, no qualification, just absolute certainty that made her heart race. "My wolf knew you were mine from the moment we met. I've tried to maintain diplomatic positioning and political neutrality, but I'm done pretending that my interest in your welfare is purely professional. You're my mate, Kara. The bond between us grows stronger every day, and I'm not going to apologize for that or try to hide it to make territorial leaders more comfortable." She should have been overwhelmed, should have demanded time to process revelations about her heritage before adding mate bond complications, should have reminded him that she still didn't fully understand who she was or what she was capable of. Instead, Kara stepped forward and kissed him. The contact was electric power flowing between them with intensity that made the room's lights flicker, and the wards outside the windows surge with responsive energy. His arms came around her immediately, pulling her close with strength tempered by gentleness that acknowledged her injuries, despite the passion evident in his response. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers, with expression that mingled satisfaction and hunger. "I've wanted to do that since I watched you standing alone on that battlefield, covered in blood and refusing to fall. I've wanted you to do that since you offered me your hand and promised protection when I had nothing, and was no one," Kara admitted, her fingers tangling in his hair with possessiveness that surprised her. "Though I didn't understand what I was facing until later." "You were never no one," Elias said fiercely. "Even before we knew your heritage, you were remarkable. The bloodline just explains capabilities that were always present, waiting for circumstances that would allow them to manifest." A knock on the door interrupted the moment, followed by Diana's voice. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the intrusion, but we have testing results that require immediate discussion." Elias pulled back with obvious reluctance, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with tenderness that made her wolf practically melt. "We'll continue this conversation later. But Kara, understand that whatever the testing reveals, whatever political complications emerge, you're not facing them alone, not anymore." She nodded, unable to find words adequate to express what his declaration meant to someone who'd spent her entire life being expendable. Dina entered carrying documentation that presumably contained formal results of bloodline testing interrupted by the mercenary assault. The healer's expression was grim but unsurprised, suggesting she'd expected exactly what she'd discovered. The testing confirms Silverist heritage. Without any doubt, she said, without preambles, settling into a chair and gesturing for them to sit as well. Direct descent from the main bloodline. Probably daughter or granddaughter of the last acknowledged family head. So my parents were definitely Silver Crest survivors, Kara said. The confirmation still carrying emotional weight, despite having suspected as much. Your mother was, Deanna corrected. Your father's bloodline is more complicated. She consulted her documentation with frown of concentration. He carried markers from 3 different noble families, Rivercrest, Stormborn, and Nightshade. All 3 lines showing dominant expression, which suggests he was product of deliberate breeding program designed to combine multiple bloodline strengths. Like me, Kara said, remembering Diana's earlier explanation about her own complex heritage. Exactly like you. In fact, your genetic profile suggests your parents' bonding was deliberate rather than accidental, specifically arranged to produce offspring who would carry combined capabilities from 4 noble bloodlines with enhanced probability of manifesting high alpha traits. Deanna's expression grew troubled. What I'm describing isn't natural mate selection. It's eugenic breeding program that would have required extensive planning and resources to execute. The implications were staggering. You're saying my existence was planned, that I was deliberately bred to be high alpha. I'm saying someone invested significant resources in ensuring you would possess capabilities necessary to unite territories under cohesive leadership, Diana replied carefully. Whether that someone was your parents acting independently, or whether they were following directives from others, I can't determine from bloodline testing alone. Elias's expression had gone thoughtful in a way that suggested he was processing information. With political instincts honed through decades of territorial leadership. If Silvercrest deliberately created breeding program to produce high alpha, that changes our understanding of their extinction. They weren't simply eliminated by rival families seeking territorial advantage. They were eliminated specifically to prevent emergence of wolf powerful enough to challenge established political structures, which explains why enemies were willing to breach council security and risk everything to eliminate Carrara before her heritage could be confirmed. Diana added, "She's not random surviving heir. She's the culmination of centuries of genetic development, specifically designed to produce capabilities that would make her virtually unstoppable once fully trained." Kara felt like the floor was tilting beneath her feet as she processed revelations that transformed her understanding of her own existence. She wasn't survivor of tragic circumstances. She was product of deliberate planning by people who'd apparently known exactly what they were creating and what it would mean for territorial politics. "My parents," she said quietly. "Did they die because of what I was? Were they killed specifically to prevent me from being raised with knowledge of my heritage?" "Almost certainly," Dana confirmed gently. "Based on timing and circumstances you've described, I suspect they went into hiding when you were very young, attempting to protect you from forces that wanted the Silver Crest breeding program permanently terminated when they were discovered and killed. Someone, probably Chelsea acting on instructions, took you in with specific directive to suppress your capability through pharmaceutical means while allowing you to survive. But why let me survive at all?" Kara demanded, frustration and anger bleeding into her voice. "If I represented such enormous threat, why not simply kill me as a child and eliminate the problem permanently? Because killing a child in her sleep carries different moral weight than eliminating active political threat," Elias said quietly, his hand finding hers with comfort that helped ground her spiraling emotions. "And because keeping you alive, but suppressed, provided insurance if circumstances changed, and someone wanted leverage over families that had benefited from Silver Crest extinction, I was kept as potential bargaining chip, Kara realized with sick certainty. Suppressed enough to be harmless, but preserved in case my existence became useful. A brutal calculation, but one that ultimately saved your life, Deanna observed. If you'd been killed as a child, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The fact that you survived, even if survival required suppression and deception, means you have opportunity to reclaim heritage and fulfill purpose. Your parents apparently died trying to protect. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on Kara like physical force. Her parents had been killed trying to keep her safe. They'd planned for her existence with precision that suggested they'd known exactly what challenges she would face. And now their sacrifice and planning would mean nothing if she couldn't survive long enough to claim heritage they died protecting. "What happens now?" she asked, looking between Diana and Elias. "The testing confirms my bloodline, but enemies already tried once to eliminate me. How long before they try again with better planning and more resources?" "That depends on how quickly they can mobilize forces willing to assault Royal Fortress," Elias replied grimly. "We bought time by eliminating their mercenary assault team, but that was preliminary attempt by forces testing our defenses and readiness. The real assault will come from territorial families who decide that eliminating you is worth risking open conflict with my authority." "How many families benefited from Silver Crest extinction?" Kara asked. 5 major territories were divided among families that claimed legitimate succession rights based on various historical connections and marriages, Deanna replied. West March, Clearwater, Shadowpine, Iron Ridge, and Stormwatch. All 5 would face significant territorial loss if your heritage is officially recognized and succession rights are formally established. 5 families with resources to mobilize armies, Kara said. Her tactical thinking apparently inherited along with her combat capabilities. Assessing the strategic situation with clarity that would have seemed impossible weeks ago, even if not all of them unite against me. Facing opposition from 2 or 3 simultaneously would be overwhelming, which is why we're not waiting for them to mobilize, Elias said, his tone carrying steel beneath the conversational cadence. We're going to force confrontation on terms favorable to us rather than allowing them to choose timing and circumstances. How? Kara asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew what he was proposing. We formally announce your heritage and issue challenge for Bloodline Tribunal before the full council. Elias explained, under Continental Pact law, disputes regarding noble succession must be resolved through formal legal proceedings rather than violence. If we invoke tribunal process, families opposing your claim will be forced to argue their positions through legal framework rather than assassination attempts. But legal proceedings only work if both sides agree to abide by results, Kara pointed out. What if they simply ignore tribunal decisions and continue trying to eliminate me regardless of legal rulings? Then they declare themselves outlaws operating outside Pact law, which justifies royal military intervention to enforce legitimate governance. Elias replied with satisfaction that suggested he'd been hoping for exactly that justification. Either way, we force them to choose between accepting your legitimate heritage claims or marking themselves as criminals worthy of elimination. It was elegant political maneuvering that transformed Kara from hunted refugee into active claimant whose rights were backed by royal authority. But it also meant painting enormous target on her back by formally announcing her existence and claims to families that had already demonstrated willingness to kill to protect their territorial holdings. When would this tribunal occur? She asked. The council is obligated to convene formal bloodline tribunal within 7 days of receiving challenge petition, Dina explained. Given the political sensitivity, I suspect they'll schedule it for exactly 7 days. Enough time for all interested parties to prepare arguments, but not so much time that tensions escalate into violence before legal proceedings can occur. 7 days, Kara repeated her enhanced awareness, already tracking implications of that timeline. 7 days to prepare for confrontation that would determine whether she lived or died, whether her parents' sacrifice had meaning or was simply tragic waste. 7 days before she would face families that had destroyed her bloodline once and would happily do so again if given opportunity. 7 days for me to teach you how to access your full capabilities without stress of immediate combat. Elias corrected his golden eyes, holding hers with intensity that made her breath catch. You've been manifesting abilities instinctively, under crisis conditions. But instinct alone won't be sufficient when facing trained nobles who've spent centuries developing methods to maintain their power. If you're going to survive tribunal and whatever follows, you need to understand and control capabilities you've been accessing without conscious direction. Training in 7 days, what should take years to develop, Kara said skeptically. Training skills that are already present in your genetic memory, simply waiting for conscious access and refinement. Elias replied, Your ancestors spent generations developing these capabilities. The knowledge is already inside you. We just need to help you recognize and utilize it deliberately rather than waiting for crisis to trigger instinctive responses. It should have seemed impossible. Should have been inadequate preparation for confrontation that could reshape territorial politics permanently. But as Kara looked at Elias's confident expression and felt the mate bond between them, resonating with power that suggested their combined capabilities exceeded what either could achieve alone. She felt hope stirring despite the overwhelming odds they faced. Then we have 7 days, she said with determination that surprised her. 7 days to prepare for the fight my parents apparently died trying to prevent, but that I'm going to finish for them. Elias's smile was fierce with pride and possession. 7 days to show territorial families why trying to eliminate high alpha bloodline was the worst strategic decision they could have made. Because you're not just surviving anymore, Kara. You're claiming what's rightfully yours. As Diana excused herself to begin preparing documentation for the tribunal challenge, and Elias started outlining training schedule that would fill every moment of the next week, Kara looked out the windows at territories stretching to distant lost horizons and understood that her life had changed irrevocably. She'd been Omega who served and disappeared when convenient. She'd been anonymous survivor trying to understand impossible circumstances. But now she was Silvercrest heir, claiming heritage backed by royal authority, preparing to face families that had destroyed her bloodline and would stop at nothing to prevent her from reclaiming what they'd stolen. The battle for her survival was entering new phase. And this time, she wasn't fighting alone or unprepared. This time she had mate whose power rivaled her own. Allies whose loyalty had been proven through fire and genetic legacy that made her potentially most dangerous wolf born in 2 centuries. 7 days until tribunal. 7 days to prepare for confrontation that would determine not just her fate, but potentially the future governance of every territory in the northern lands. The question wasn't whether she could survive what was coming. The question was whether territorial families would survive the awakening of capabilities they tried so desperately to suppress. And Kara was beginning to suspect the answer might reshape pack politics in ways no one had anticipated, least of all the families who thought eliminating her bloodline would guarantee their power permanently. Chapter 9. 7 Days of Fire. The training began before dawn on the first day, when most of the fortress was still wrapped in darkness and the chill of early morning made breath visible in the courtyard air. Kara stood in the center of the training grounds, dressed in light combat gear that allowed maximum mobility, facing Elias across 20 feet of packed earth that had witnessed centuries of warriors honing their skills. "Your instincts are remarkable," Elias said, his voice carrying clearly across the distance despite speaking conversationally. "But instinct alone creates predictable patterns that trained opponents can exploit. What we're going to develop over the next 7 days is conscious control over capabilities you've been accessing unconsciously." "Where do we start?" Kara asked, suppressing the nervousness that threatened to undermine her concentration. She'd never had formal combat training beyond what she'd observed while serving garrison duties, and the idea of learning in days what normally required years felt overwhelming despite Elias's confidence. "We start with awareness," Elias replied. "Close your eyes and tell me what you sense." Kara obeyed, letting her enhanced perception expand outward from her position. Immediately, she felt the blazing presence of Elias before her, but also dozens of other presences throughout the fortress warriors. Beginning their morning routines, servants preparing breakfast, guards maintaining watch from tower positions. "I sense approximately 80 individuals within the fortress walls," she reported, "plus another 20 or so in the surrounding territories within my range. The closest external presence is about half a mile southeast, a patrol of 4 moving along the border markers. Good. Now tell me what they're feeling." Kara focused her awareness more precisely on the individuals she'd identified. And suddenly, emotions flooded through her consciousness with clarity that was almost overwhelming. Determination from the patrol maintaining vigilance, despite boring routine. Contentment from servants performing familiar tasks. Anticipation from warriors preparing for training sessions. And from Elias, something complex that she couldn't quite categorize. Pride mixed with concern. Affection tangled with protective fury. And underneath it all, a hunger that made her wolf respond with matching desire. Despite the inappropriateness of such feelings during training, the patrol is alert but relaxed, confident in their abilities, but not expecting actual threats, she said, deliberately avoiding commenting on what she sensed from him. The servants are content with their work. The warriors are eager for training. "And you?" She hesitated. "And I am intensely aware of my mate standing before me, which is extremely distracting when I'm supposed to be teaching rather than claiming." Elias finished with a slight smile that suggested he knew exactly what she'd sensed. But that awareness is precisely what we're training. High alpha capabilities include perceiving emotional states and using that knowledge strategically. In combat, understanding an opponent's emotional state can mean the difference between life and death. He moved without warning, crossing the distance between them with supernatural speed that should have caught her completely off guard. But Carrara's awareness tracked his movement before conscious thought could process what was happening, her body flowing aside with technique she didn't remember learning, but that worked perfectly to avoid his strike. "Excellent," Elias said with approval as he returned to his starting position. "Your genetic memory provided defensive response before your conscious mind even registered threat. But you're not actively controlling that response. You're simply allowing instinct to take over when danger manifests." "Isn't instinct enough?" Kara asked, her heart still racing from the sudden engagement despite her successful evasion. "Instinct is sufficient against opponents who rely on straightforward tactics. But nobles who've spent decades developing combat expertise know how to create situations where instinct provides wrong response." Elias moved again, this time with feint that suggested attack from one direction before suddenly shifting to come from another angle entirely. Carrara's instinct responded to the initial threat, committing to defensive movement that left her vulnerable, when the real attack came from unexpected direction. Elias's strike deliberately pulled to avoid actually injuring her, tapped her ribs where killing blow would have landed if he'd been attacking with genuine intent. "You see," he said, helping her regain balance she'd lost when her defensive movement proved inadequate. Instinct responded to apparent threat, leaving you exposed to actual danger. Conscious control would have allowed you to recognize the feint and adjust accordingly. They spent the next 3 hours drilling that distinction, learning to differentiate between instinctive response and conscious tactical assessment. Elias attacked from dozens of angles with varying combinations of feints, genuine strikes, and complex sequences designed to overwhelm instinct-based defenses. Each time, Kara relied purely on genetic memory. She found herself vulnerable to some aspect of his assault. But gradually she began to recognize patterns and make conscious decisions about when to trust instinct and when to override it with analytical thinking. By the time they broke for breakfast, Carol was exhausted, bruised from dozens of killing blows that Elias had pulled at the last instant and beginning to understand just how much she still needed to learn. "You're progressing faster than anyone I've ever trained," Bridget commented as they ate in the fortress's great hall, where warriors gathered for communal meals that reinforced pack bonds and hierarchy. Most wolves require weeks just to begin recognizing the difference between instinct and conscious control. "You're already making tactical adjustments during engagement because her genetic memory includes centuries of accumulated knowledge," Captain Leonard added from his position further down the table. "She's not learning from scratch. She's remembering skills that were deliberately bred into her bloodline across multiple generations." The conversation highlighted something Kara had been struggling to process. She wasn't developing new capabilities so much as accessing abilities that had always been present but suppressed. Every technique Elias demonstrated triggered recognition in her awareness, as if she was remembering rather than discovering. The afternoon training shifted focus from defensive awareness to offensive capabilities. Elias provided her with training sword, weighted and balanced for her grip specifically, and began teaching her to consciously direct the combat techniques that had manifested instinctively during the battlefield encounter. "Your movements during actual combat were fluid and precise," he explained, demonstrating a sequence of strikes that flowed together with deadly grace. "But you were reacting rather than initiating. Against multiple opponents, reactive fighting eventually becomes overwhelmed by sheer numbers. You need to learn to dictate the pace and flow of engagement rather than simply responding to threats as they emerge." They drilled defensive sequences for hours, Elias correcting her positioning and timing with patience that suggested he genuinely enjoyed teaching despite the pressure of their limited time frame. Gradually, Kara began to feel the difference between allowing genetic memory to guide her movements and consciously choosing specific techniques for strategic reasons. By evening, when they finally stopped for dinner, Kara could barely lift her arms despite the healing elixirs Dina had provided to accelerate recovery. But she'd successfully executed complex offensive sequences that would have seemed impossible that morning, and she'd begun to understand how to integrate conscious tactical thinking with instinctive responses. "Tomorrow, we work on integrating your awareness capabilities with physical combat," Elias said as he walked her back to her chambers, his presence a constant warmth that helped ease exhaustion, threatening to overwhelm her. Being able to sense opponents' positions and emotional states is powerful advantage, but only if you can process that information while simultaneously maintaining combat effectiveness. "Is that even possible?" Kara asked, remembering how difficult it had been to maintain awareness during the training sessions, her concentration constantly torn between physical engagement and supernatural perception. "For you? Yes." Elias stopped outside her door, his golden eyes studying her face with intensity that made her breath catch despite her exhaustion. "High alpha capabilities specifically include the ability to maintain enhanced awareness during combat stress. Your ancestors developed that integration over centuries because it's what made them unstoppable against opponents who could match them physically, but couldn't match their tactical perception. He leaned forward, pressing a kiss to her forehead that felt both chaste and loaded with promise of more intimate contact once circumstances allowed. Rest. Tomorrow's training will be harder than today's, and we're only getting started. The second day began with integration exercises that pushed Kara's capabilities to their limits. Elias arranged for 6 warriors to attack her simultaneously, while she attempted to maintain awareness of their positions, emotional states, and tactical intentions, while defending herself physically. The first dozen attempts ended with her being killed within seconds as her concentration fractured under the pressure of processing multiple inputs simultaneously. But gradually, something shifted in her perception. Instead of trying to consciously track each element separately, she learned to let awareness flow naturally, understanding positions and intentions without deliberate analysis, allowing her body to respond to tactical knowledge that bypassed conscious thought entirely. There, Elias said with satisfaction when she successfully defended against coordinated assault for the first time, her movements flowing with efficiency that spoke of complete integration between awareness and physical response. That's what high alpha combat looks like when properly developed. You're not thinking about individual elements. You're simply knowing and responding with precisions that appears supernatural to observers. The third and fourth days focused on offensive applications of her integrated capabilities. Elias taught her to use awareness of opponents' emotional states to create openings that wouldn't otherwise exist, projecting confidence that made enemies hesitate or seeming vulnerable in ways that drew attacks she was fully prepared to counter. Psychological warfare is as important as physical capability when you're facing opponents whose skills match yours, he explained during one particularly brutal training session, where she'd successfully manipulated 3 warriors into compromising their defensive positioning through careful display of apparent weakness. Making enemies believe you're vulnerable when you're actually setting trap is how outnumbered forces achieve victory against superior numbers. By the 5th day, Kara was sparring with Elias himself on relatively equal terms. Not winning, but forcing him to utilize capabilities he normally reserved for genuine combat rather than training exercises. The watching warriors gathered to observe their sessions, with expressions ranging from awe to something approaching fear as they witnessed abilities they'd never seen displayed outside of historical accounts. "She's magnificent," Bridget murmured to Leonard during one exchange where Kara successfully anticipated and countered a complex sequence that should have been impossible to predict. If this is what she can do after 5 days of training, what will she be capable of after years of development? Something that will either unite all territories under cohesive leadership or trigger conflicts that make the War of Broken Crowns look like minor territorial dispute. Leonard replied quietly. High alphas weren't prophesied lightly. They represent fundamental shift in power dynamics that will force every territorial family to choose between accepting new authority structure or fighting to preserve independence. They've maintained for centuries. The 6th day brought new complication. A messenger arrived from the council with formal notification that the Bloodline Tribunal had been scheduled for the following afternoon, earlier than the full 7 days that regulations technically allowed, but justified by council's assessment that delaying formal proceedings would create unacceptable tensions. "They're trying to catch us unprepared," Elias said, reading the formal notification with expression that suggested he'd anticipated such maneuvering. Moving the tribunal up by a day means less time for you to develop your capabilities, which disadvantages our position if physical demonstrations are required. Will they be required? Kara asked, anxiety spiking despite 6 days of intensive training that had transformed her from instinct-dependent fighter into someone capable of genuine tactical combat. Almost certainly. Noble families contesting your claim will argue that bloodline testing alone is insufficient, that you must demonstrate capability consistent with Silvercrest heritage in ways that can be observed and verified by neutral parties. Elias set down the notification with careful control that suggested he was managing anger at the political manipulation. They'll bring their own champions to challenge you, hoping to prove through combat that you're inadequately developed, despite your genetic heritage. Can I win against champions with decades more training than I have? Can you win against me? Elias countered, his golden eyes holding hers with confidence that helped steady her racing heart. You've been forcing me to use techniques I haven't needed in years during our sparring sessions. If you can hold your own against me, you can certainly handle whatever champions territorial families bring to challenge your claims. The final day before tribunal focused on refinement rather than learning new techniques. Elias drilled her on the specific sequences and capabilities most likely to be tested during formal proceedings, ensuring she could demonstrate them flawlessly, despite the pressure of being observed by hostile nobles, looking for any excuse to deny her heritage claims. But that evening, as Kara prepared for what might be the most important confrontation of her life, Elias appeared at her chambers with expression that suggested he had something significant to discuss beyond training strategies. "There's one more capability we haven't addressed," he said, settling beside her on the sofa, where she'd been reviewing documentation about tribunal procedures that Deanna had provided. "Something that will be absolutely crucial tomorrow, but that I've been hesitant to push because it requires intimacy that goes beyond what we've shared so far." Carrara's heart began racing for reasons that had nothing to do with anxiety about combat. What capability? High alphas achieve their full potential through mate bonds that allow them to draw upon their partner's strength and capabilities. Elias explained carefully, his hand finding hers with touch that sent tingles up her arm despite having been in near constant physical contact during training all week. Right now, the bond between us is partially formed enough that I can sense your emotional states, and you can draw upon my presence for stability. But completing the bond would give you access to centuries of accumulated knowledge and power that my bloodline carries. You're talking about. Kara trailed off, her face flushing as implications became clear. I'm talking about formally completing our mate bond. Elias confirmed his thumb-tracing patterns on her palm that made coherent thought increasingly difficult, which traditionally involves physical intimacy that would finalize supernatural connection between us. But Kara, I need you to understand that I'm not proposing this simply for tactical advantage tomorrow. The bond between us is real and would exist regardless of political circumstances. I'm asking because you're my mate, and because completing our connection is what we both want, not because it happens to also be strategically useful. She studied his face, seeing sincerity there that made the decision suddenly simple, despite its complexity. If I say yes, is it because I want you, or because I need the tactical advantage your power would provide? Yes, Elias replied with slight smile. Both can be true simultaneously. You're allowed to want your mate while also recognizing that bonding with him provides advantages beyond emotional satisfaction. Kara leaned forward, closing the distance between them until their lips were nearly touching. Then yes, not because of tomorrow's tribunal, but because I've wanted this since the moment you offered me your hand on that battlefield and promised I wasn't alone anymore. What followed was tender and fierce simultaneously. Completion of bond that had been building between them since their first meeting. Physical expression of connection that transcended political calculations or tactical advantages. When they finally lay together afterward, both breathing hard and power, still crackling between them with intensity that made the room's lights flicker, Kara felt fundamentally changed in ways that went beyond the training of the past week. She could sense Elias in her awareness with clarity that dwarfed what she'd perceived before. Not just his presence and emotions, but his memories and accumulated knowledge. Centuries of black mane, bloodline expertise, suddenly accessible through their completed bond. Combat techniques her ancestors had never developed, but his family had perfected. Political strategies that would help navigate the tribunal proceedings. Understanding of pack dynamics that would allow her to project authority that transcended her relative youth and inexperience. "How do you feel?" Elias murmured against her hair, his arms wrapped around her with possessiveness that made her wolf practically purr with contentment. "Like I just gained 300 years of experience." In an instant, Carrara admitted, still processing the flood of knowledge that was integrating with her own genetic memory. "Is it always like this?" Completing mate bonds, not even remotely. Most mate bonds provide emotional connection and some tactical coordination. What you're experiencing, full knowledge transfer across bloodlines, only occurs when both partners possess high alpha potential. Elias pulled back slightly to study her face with expression that mingled satisfaction and awe. "We're not just mated, Kara. We're creating something unprecedented. Combined capabilities that exceed what either bloodline could achieve independently." The implications were staggering. But Kara was too content in the moment to fully process what their completed bond might mean for tomorrow's confrontation or longer-term territorial politics. For now, it was enough to lie in her mate's arms, feeling power and knowledge, settling into her consciousness with certainty that whatever challenges the tribunal brought, she would face them with capabilities that made her genuinely dangerous, rather than simply potentially significant. 7 days, she murmured, already feeling exhaustion from the day's training and evening's intimacy pulling her toward sleep. 7 days ago, I was Omega, who barely survived battlefield encounter. Now I'm Silverest Heir with high alpha capabilities, mated to the most powerful king in the Northern Territories, preparing to face tribunal that will determine the future of territorial governance. 7 days ago, I was king managing comfortable political status quo. Elias replied, his voice carrying satisfied rumble that suggested he had no regrets despite the chaos they'd triggered. Now I made it to Wolf. Who's going to reshape pack politics, whether territorial families like it or not? I think I got the better end of that transformation. As Kara drifted toward sleep, wrapped in warmth and power of completed mate bond, she felt ready for whatever the tribunal would bring. Not because she'd mastered all possible capabilities in 7 days of intensive training, but because she finally understood what her parents had apparently known when they'd created her. She wasn't meant to simply survive in worlds structured around pack hierarchies that suppressed potential in service of political poor inconvenience. She was meant to change that world entirely. Tomorrow, the tribunal would discover whether territorial families were prepared for the transformation one properly developed, high alpha could trigger. And Kara suspected the answer would surprise everyone, including the families who thought they'd permanently eliminated such threat 2 decades ago. I believe you meant to approve Chapter 9 and want me to proceed to Chapter 10, the final chapter. Let me continue with the conclusion of the story. Chapter 10. The Tribunal of Blood and Bonds. The council chamber had been transformed for the Bloodline Tribunal, where before it had been arranged for diplomatic discussions. Now it resembled an arena circular floor cleared of furniture. Galleries rising on all sides where territorial nobles and their representatives could observe proceedings, and at the cardinal points, 4 raised platforms where the most senior alphas sat in judgment. Kara entered flanked by Elias and Captain Leonard, wearing formal attire in silver crest colors that Diana had somehow procured overnight deep silver blue that marked her claimed heritage. While the cut suggested both elegance and readiness for combat if proceedings turned violent. The completed mate bond thrummed between her and Elias with power that every supernatural being in the chamber could sense. Their combined presence making several nobles shift uncomfortably in their seats. "She's marked," someone whispered from the galleries, loud enough to carry. "The king has claimed her formally." "Of course he has," another voice replied with disgust, "securing alliance with potential high alpha before anyone else could make similar offer. Clever politics, even if it complicates his supposed neutrality in these proceedings." Alpha Joshua Padilla rose from his judgment platform, his expression carefully neutral, despite the political tensions crackling through the chamber. "We convene this tribunal under Continental Pact law to address claims regarding bloodline succession and territorial rights. Carol Lawrence, formerly of Clearwater Pack, has petitioned for formal recognition as heir to House Silverist with all rights and privileges such recognition entails." He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the assembled nobles before continuing. Contesting this petition are representatives from 5 territorial families: Westmarch, Clearwater, Shadowpine, Iron Ridge, and Stormwatch, all of whom currently hold lands that would be subject to succession challenges if the petitioner's claims are validated. From the galleries, Alpha Darling stood with expression that mingled anger and calculation. The testing results, while suggestive, are not conclusive regarding actual capabilities. "We can test not the bloodline genetics, but whether this wolf possesses the developed skills and leadership capacity that would justify overturning 2 decades of established territorial governance. In other words," Elias said quietly, his voice nonetheless carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, "you acknowledge. She's Silvercrest heir, but want to argue she's inadequately trained to claim what's rightfully hers. Convenient position for families that have been profiting from stolen territories for 20 years. Your Majesty," Joshua said with tone that suggested he was trying to maintain order despite provocative commentary, "you will have opportunity to present arguments supporting the petition. For now, we're establishing the basis for contestation." Another alpha rose from the galleries, an older male whose silver hair and deep scars marked him as someone who'd survived decades of pack conflicts. "I am Greg Gleon, alpha of Shadowpine territory. I propose that we settle this dispute through traditional means trial by combat. If the petitioner truly possesses Silvercrest capabilities, as claimed, she should be able to demonstrate them against champions representing the contesting families." Murmurs of approval rippled through the galleries. Trial by combat was ancient tradition that predated formal legal proceeding, rooted in belief that supernatural capabilities manifested most clearly during actual conflict rather than theoretical assessment. "I object," Elias said immediately, his power manifesting visibly as golden light flickered along his skin. "Trial by combat between newly awakened heir and champions with decades of training would be fundamentally unfair, regardless of genetic capabilities. You're not proposing fair test. You're proposing assassination with legal sanction. Then perhaps the petitioner is insufficiently developed to claim rights she seeks." Darling countered coldly. "If she cannot defend her heritage through combat, what makes her qualified to govern territories that require strong leadership, capable of protecting pack interests?" Kara felt Elias's fury through their bond, sensed his protective instinct wearing with political necessity that made refusing combat challenge appear weak. Through her enhanced awareness, she tracked the emotional states of nobles in the galleries. Many genuinely wanted fair assessment, but others were calculating how trial by combat could eliminate threat she represented while maintaining appearance of legal propriety. "I accept the challenge," she said clearly, her voice cutting through rising tensions with authority she developed over 7 days of intensive training. "Not because I believe combat is appropriate basis for determining succession rights, but because refusing would give credence to suggestions that I'm inadequately capable despite my heritage." "Kara, no." Elias began, but she squeezed his hand with pressure that conveyed through their bond what she couldn't say aloud. "Trust me, however," she continued, her enhanced perception tracking reactions as nobles processed her unexpected acceptance. "I propose modification to traditional trial by combat format. Rather than facing single champion from each contesting family, which would require 5 separate engagements and create endurance disadvantage regardless of skill, I suggest simultaneous engagement against representatives from all 5 families working in coordination." Shocked silence greeted her proposal. Fighting 5 champions simultaneously was suicide against opponents with decades more experience, especially when those champions could coordinate their attacks to exploit numerical advantage. Unless Kara thought with certainty flowing through her awareness, you possessed capabilities specifically designed to counter coordinated assaults by multiple opponents working together. The Silver Crest breeding program had developed high alpha genetics specifically to enable single wolf to face and defeat superior numbers through awareness and tactical coordination that transcended what individual fighters could to achieve. "That's madness," Bridget hissed from her position behind Carrara. "Even with your capabilities is strategically sound." Leonard interrupted his scarred face, showing surprise that shifted to understanding as tactical implications became clear. 5 individual fights allow champions to study her techniques and adapt, but simultaneous engagement forces them to coordinate in real time. While she exploits gaps in their coordination through awareness they can't match, she's turning their numerical advantage into tactical liability. Elias said slowly, his fury transforming to satisfaction as he recognized the brilliance of her strategy. Instead of facing superior experience 5 times sequentially, she forces them into a situation where their experience is less relevant than coordination. And coordination is precisely where high alpha capabilities provide overwhelming advantage. "The petitioner's proposal is accepted," Joshua said after brief consultation with the other senior alphas on judgment platforms. 5 champions. Simultaneous engagement. Combat continues until clear victor emerges or petitioner yields. Are the contesting families prepared to name their representatives? One by one, champions stepped forward from the gallery's warriors, whose reputations preceded them, whose combat records included victories against opponents that had seemed unbeatable. Kara studied each with enhanced perception, cataloging their emotional states, physical capabilities, and tactical preferences through awareness that integrated knowledge from both Silvercrest genetic memory and Black Mane accumulated expertise flowing through her mate bond. They were confident, experienced, coordinated through years of training together specifically for scenarios where noble families needed to present united front against common threats. Under normal circumstances, they would have been absolutely unstoppable against single opponent, regardless of that opponent's genetic advantages. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Kara was a normal opponent. The champions formed loose circle around her in the cleared arena floor, their positioning designed to create overlapping fields of attack, while preventing her from focusing on any single fighter without leaving herself vulnerable to others. Standard pack tactics for overwhelming superior individual opponent through coordinated assault. Begin, Joshua commanded, and 5 champions moved as one. Kara's awareness exploded outward with intensity that made several watching nobles gasp as they sensed power manifesting. She tracked every movement, every intention, every micro-expression that telegraphed attacks before they fully committed to execution. Time seemed to slow as her enhanced perception processed information faster than conscious thought, her body responding to tactical knowledge that flowed through genetic memory and mate bond simultaneously. The first champion, the one who'd positioned himself as tactical coordinator, his confidence suggesting he'd done this many times before, attacked with combination strike designed to force her into defensive position that would leave her vulnerable to follow-up assaults from his partners. But Carrara's awareness had identified him as coordinator before engagement began. Instead of defending, she flowed forward into his attack with movement that brought her inside his defensive perimeters, while simultaneously positioning herself where the other 4 champions' planned strikes would interfere with each other, rather than supporting their leader assault. Her counter-driven by Silver Crest combat techniques, refined through Blackmane precision, struck the coordinator's throat with force that sent him staggering backward, choking, and unable to continue coordinating his team's efforts. "Coordinator down," she said calmly, her awareness already tracking the remaining 4 champions as they struggled to adapt to losing their tactical leadership within the first exchange. 4 remaining, attempting to maintain coordination without central authority. What followed was brutal display of capabilities that made the watching nobles fall silent with something approaching awe or fear. Kara didn't just fight the 4 remaining champions. She orchestrated their defeat with precision that seemed choreographed despite being entirely improvised. She used their attempts at coordination against them, positioning herself where their attacks would compromise each other's effectiveness. She exploited emotional states she could sense through enhanced perception, projecting confidence that made them hesitate or seeming vulnerable in ways that drew attacks she was fully prepared to counter. Most devastatingly, she adapted tactics mid-engagement based on continuous awareness of their evolving strategies, something that should have been impossible in the chaos of actual combat, but that high alpha perception made seem almost effortless. The second champion fell to strike that he never saw coming. His attention focused on a apparent opening in her defense that she deliberately created to draw exactly that attack. The third and fourth went down in rapid succession as their remaining coordination collapsed under pressure of facing opponent who seemed to know their intentions before they'd fully formed them. The fifth champion, eldest of the group and most experienced, managed to last nearly 30 seconds longer than his fellows through sheer skill and refusal to rely on coordination that was clearly ineffective. But even his decades of combat expertise proved insufficient against opponent who possessed not just superior genetics, but also tactical knowledge, drawn from two noble bloodlines working in perfect synchronization through completed mate bond. When he finally fell, Kara stood alone in the center of the arena floor, breathing hard but fundamentally uninjured, surrounded by 5 champions who'd been considered among the most dangerous fighters in their territories. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Even the nobles who'd been most vocal in contesting her claims seemed unable to find words adequate to address what they'd just witnessed. "The combat trial is concluded," Joshua said finally, his voice carrying carefully controlled shock. "The petitioner has demonstrated capability consistent with no exceeding historical accounts of Silver Rest combat effectiveness. Does anyone wish to continue contesting her bloodline claims based on inadequate capability development?" No one spoke. What could they say? Kara had just defeated 5 experienced champions simultaneously while making it look almost effortless demonstration of abilities that went beyond impressive into territory that suggested she was exactly what bloodline testing had indicated. Then we moved to formal recognition phase. Joshua continued his expression grave as he recognized implications of what was about to occur. Karazorns, by right of proven bloodline and demonstrated capability. I formally recognize you as legitimate heir to House Silvercrest with all rights, privileges, and territorial claims such recognition entails under Continental Pact law. The words hung in the air like thunder before lightning. Formal recognition meant the 5 families currently holding Silverus territories would face legitimate legal challenges to their authority. Claims they could contest through tribunals and negotiations, but that they could no longer simply dismiss as fraudulent or unsupported. However, Joshua added, his tone sharpening, recognition of heritage does not automatically restore territorial holdings. Succession disputes regarding lands held for 2 decades will require separate proceedings to determine appropriate resolution that balances historical rights against contemporary governance realities. It was political compromise that gave everyone something. Kara got recognition of her heritage and legal standing to pursue territorial claims, while the contesting families got time to prepare defenses and negotiate settlements rather than facing immediate dispossession. But before anyone could respond to Joshua's declaration, new complication emerged. From the galleries, an ancient alpha rose with presence that made even the senior judgment platform. Alphas shift with discomfort that suggested they recognized someone whose authority transcended normal territorial politics. I am Roman Roach, he said, his voice carrying weight of centuries despite his apparent age. I served House Silver before its extinction, witnessed the breeding program that created this young wolf's genetic profile, and I carry knowledge regarding prophecies that her emergence fulfills. The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. No one had known that Silver loyalists had survived the family's extinction. The assumption had been that all retainers and servants had been eliminated along with the noble bloodline itself. The high alpha prophecy was not metaphor. Roman continued his attention fixed on Kara with intensity that made her feel like he was seeing through to her very soul. It was literal prediction that Silverist breeding program would eventually produce wolf, capable of transcending territorial divisions and uniting all packs under cohesive leadership. That wolf stands before you now, recognized by ancient bloodline and bonded to the most powerful contemporary alpha family. He turned to address the assembled nobles directly. You can contest her territorial claims. You can argue about appropriate timelines for succession resolution, but you cannot prevent what she represents: fundamental shift in pack governance. That will either be accomplished through cooperation and peaceful transition, or through conflicts that will make past wars seem insignificant by comparison. Are you threatening us? Darling demanded, rising with fury that suggested he recognized existential threat to his authority. I am stating reality, Roman replied calmly. High alphas possess capabilities that allow them to integrate pack bonds across territories, creating unified governance structures that transcends traditional pack divisions. Whether such integration occurs through negotiation or conquest depends entirely on how territorial families choose to respond to legitimate heir claiming what was stolen from her bloodline. Elias moved to stand beside Kara, his hand finding hers with pressure that conveyed support and solidarity through their bond. I propose an alternative to immediate territorial disputes, he said, his voice carrying royal authority that commanded attention. Lady Kara and I invite all territorial families to enter negotiations regarding gradual transition of Silver Crest lands back to legitimate governance, with appropriate compensation and timelines that prevent economic disruption or political chaos. And if we refuse such negotiations, Alpha Gleason asked coldly, then we pursue legal claims through formal tribunals as continental pack law allows. Elias replied with steel underlying conversational tone, which would take years, cost enormous resources, and likely result in same territorial transfers, but with added benefit of destroying any goodwill between your families and the High Alpha, who will eventually govern those territories regardless. It was elegant political maneuvering that transformed territorial dispute from zero-sum confrontation into negotiation, where everyone could claim some degree of victory. Families got time and compensation rather than immediate dispossession, while Kara got recognition and path toward reclaiming her heritage without triggering wars that would devastate territories she was meant to govern. I support His Majesty's proposal, Joshua said after a long moment of silence. Formal negotiations under council oversight, with objective of achieving equitable resolution within 5 years. All city commit to good faith engagement and accept that some territorial transfers will occur based on legitimate succession rights. One by one, the other senior alphas on judgment platforms indicated agreement. Even Darling, despite obvious fury at how proceedings had developed, recognized that accepting negotiations was better alternative than facing years of legal battles he would ultimately lose. Then this tribunal is concluded, Joshua declared. Lady Carrara of House Silverest, your heritage is formally recognized, and your right to pursue territorial claims is established under continental pack law. May wisdom guide all parties toward resolution that serves pack interests rather than individual ambitions. As the assembled nobles began to disperse, some with satisfaction and others with barely concealed rage, Kara felt the weight of what had just occurred settling onto her shoulders. She was no longer anonymous Omega fighting for survival. She was recognized nobility with legitimate claims to vast territories, mated to Alpha King, whose combined power with hers represented force that could reshape pack politics permanently. You were magnificent, Elias murmured, pulling her close despite the watching nobles, who would certainly report every detail of their interaction. 5 champions defeated simultaneously while making it look effortless. You just announced to every territorial family that challenging you physically would be suicide. Good, Kara replied, surprised by her own fierce satisfaction. Let them know what happens when they try to eliminate threats through violence rather than accepting legitimate claims. My parents died because people decided suppressing our bloodline was easier than accepting what we represented. I'm done being suppressed. Roman approached them as the chamber emptied, his ancient eyes studying Kara with expression that mingled approval and concern. Your parents would be proud, he said quietly. They died protecting you, ensuring you'd survive long enough to claim your heritage. But Lady Kara recognized that this is only beginning. Formal recognition and negotiated settlements won't satisfy all the families who profited from your bloodline's extinction. Some will continue trying to eliminate you, regardless of legal, rulings, or political consequences. Then they'll discover why trying to eliminate High Alpha bloodline was strategic mistake that will cost them everything. Elias said with dangerous calm. I didn't mate with Kara to watch her be assassinated by nobles, too short-sighted to recognize that resisting inevitable change only makes that change more catastrophic when it finally occurs. See that you protect her well, Your Majesty, Roman replied, because what she represents, unity under High Alpha leadership, could either bring unprecedented prosperity and peace, or trigger conflicts that destroy everything our people have built over centuries. Which outcome emerges depends entirely on choices made in the coming years. As Roman departed, leaving them alone in the now empty chamber, Kara leaned against Elias with exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. I thought winning tribunal would feel more conclusive, she admitted. Instead, it feels like we've just started a process that will take years to resolve. Because we have, Elias confirmed, his arms coming around her with strength that made her feel safe despite the political complications ahead. But Kara, you don't have to face those years alone. You have mate whose power matches yours. Allies whose loyalty has been proven through fire and capabilities that make you genuinely dangerous, rather than simply theoretically significant. Whatever comes next, we face it together. She tilted her head up to kiss him, drawing strength from mate bond that thrummed between them, with power that several nobles had sensed and commented on. Together, she agreed, not as Omega who serves and disappears, but as High Alpha claiming what's rightfully mine and changing pack politics whether territorial families like it or not. That's my mate, Elias said with fierce pride, terrifying and magnificent in equal measure. As they left the chamber to begin negotiations that would consume the coming months and years, Kara reflected on the journey that had brought her from anonymous garrison scout to recognized Silver Crest heir. She'd survived battlefield encounter that should have killed her, discovered heritage that had been deliberately suppressed, endured assassination attempts by forces that wanted her eliminated before she could claim her birthright, and ultimately proven through combat and tribunal that she was exactly what prophecies had predicted. High Alpha capable of reshaping pack governance, fundamentally, the road ahead would be difficult. Some families would honor negotiated settlements, while others would continue seeking ways to eliminate threat she represented. Political maneuvering and legal battles would consume years before territorial claims were fully resolved. And the responsibility of being High Alpha, of potentially uniting all northern territories under cohesive leadership, would demand capabilities she was still developing despite 7 days of intensive training. But as she walked beside her mate, feeling power and knowledge flowing through completed bond, surrounded by warriors whose loyalty had been proven repeatedly, Kara felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She was Silvercrest heir. High Alpha prophesied to transform pack politics and mate to the most powerful contemporary alpha in the Northern Territories. Her parents had died protecting her potential. Chelsea and unknown conspirators had suppressed her capabilities for 2 decades. Territorial families had profited from her bloodline's supposed extinction. Now she was reclaiming everything that had been stolen, and the wolves, who'd thought suppressing her would guarantee their power permanently, were about to discover what happened when High Alpha bloodline finally awakened to its full potential. The battle for her heritage was over. The war to reshape pack politics had just begun, and Kara intended to win it all. The story ends here, but Karara's real battle is just beginning. Years of negotiations, hidden enemies, and the weight of uniting territories that have been divided for centuries. Here's what keeps me up at night. Her parents created her through deliberate breeding to be a weapon against injustice. But is it fair to engineer someone's entire existence for a purpose they never chose? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. And if this story made you feel something, hit that like button.